Hey everybody, this is Jason Bosch, and I am here with Alison McDowell. And something. So I watched this documentary, WeWork. I don't know, like last year, and it was an interesting story. But I was also like, this is not the story. Like there were so many things in the documentary. It was a Hulu
So
documentary.
for people who don't know what WeWork is, just quick.
Yeah. Okay. So WeWork is a company, supposedly a company that deals in real estate, and you'll probably see their buildings. They still have the buildings all over with the big name WeWork on the side of it. But it was a co-work. They would lease out space and build these co-working centers. So different companies, entrepreneurs would come in and sublease space from them. But it wasn't just subleasing space. You were like entering into this whole culture that they were trying to create around around a lot of different things. But community and supposedly encouraging people to work together, and I mean that was the idea, but there was also like a lot of camaraderie and like there was a lot of partying involved. Yeah, so the story goes, this guy Adam Neumann, created this company. He had this great vision and he pulled all these people together again, but there was some problems with financial, not meeting financial obligations, because it just kept growing and growing. So they kept requiring more and more capital in order to just keep it growing, and it never did. It never actually did make a profit, at least under his reign. Supposedly his reign. But anyways, I saw this documentary that they put out on Hulu, and there's also like several.
It gets a lot of coverage.
It's getting a lot of coverage, and Apple TV has a series called We Crashed, which is like a dramatic portrayal of the story. But like I saw the documentary, I'm like, I don't know what the story is, but this isn't the story. There were too many things that just didn't add up. Like, the main narrative was this guy was such a smooth talker, and he was just an inspirational figure, very charismatic guy, and he just pulled everybody in, and like everybody just like was magnetically attracted to his personality, including the investors, like SoftBank and Jamie Dimon. I mean, all these like major players.
They're such softies.
They're just such, they were just like, oh, he told us such a great story. So, without actually like, supposedly without even looking at his like the financials or anything like that, they just invested these insane amounts of money, getting up into the billions of dollars.
It's like $47 billion at one point, I think. Yeah. SoftBank and the valuation. Yeah, I think the initial SoftBank money was 4.4 billion. So anyway, yeah, there's a story. And then it crashed. The dreams crashed.
The dream crashed.
The star of the show took a bow and went into hiding for a couple years, and then poof, popped back up. Good as gold.
Yeah. So yeah, Adam Neumann is got a new project. I think he's got more than one new project, but one of them is a company called Flow, and then. So actually, I was like, Alison, Alison and I watched. We were in Texas, maybe, I don't know, but I was like,
yeah.
we sat down and watched the documentary. I shared it with her.
Like, there's something up with this documentary. I don't know what it is, but like, there's something.
Yeah, and so, but just kind of ironically, I guess it turns out like Alison's been doing all this stuff going back years on Marc Andreessen and Andreessen Horowitz, and then all of a sudden,
and Laura Arrillaga and
Laura,
the wife,
right, yeah, for sure.
Because she created the whole environment of social impact finance at Stanford and social venture partners and stuff. So yeah, so she's in on the ground floor. She's kind of quietly behind the scenes of a lot of this, but
right. Yeah. So anyways, it loops back around. That ended up, now we have Adam Neumann and Marc Andreessen working together. So, yeah. So we just.
And a couple of weeks ago, Jason, you had sent me a 1 hour episode podcast from the Andreessen Horowitz channel. And they were like, oh, we're releasing this footage. So Flow came about, I think, last summer. I think they announced it August 2022. And so at some point there was sort of a launching episode, and they had held but some footage from the briefings that they released fairly recently, like within the past month. So you had sent it to me, and I just didn't get around to watching it because I've been doing this deep dive and the poker and the game theory and all this stuff, and so I just kind of didn't get around to it. And then when I finally watched it, I'm like, oh no, we have to talk about this, Jason. And it went from, we need to talk about this, Jason, why don't I pull some clips and you can pull some clips, to, oh my gosh, I have a 200 slide deck. and so we're not going to make everybody sit through it all at once. But what's kind of cool is I was trying to find ways of organizing it. And so I ended up grouping some of the thematics around topics of interest to, my friends and collaborators. So essentially, as I envision this will be the first of like a 6-part series. And we'll have guest participants in different sections. So my friend Lynn in Dallas, she's going to step in and we're going to talk a little bit about education privatization and affordable housing and how that affects Dallas. Leo is going to join us and talk a little bit about another Adam Neumann project called Flow Carbon, which is about carbon credit trading and Web3 technologies. And then my friend Brandy lives in Florida, and she's actually been living through like quite some time trying to navigate the complexities of Florida real estate. And she's in the vicinity of Palm Beach, not Palm Beach proper, but that region, and just seeing the crazy billionaires that are in Florida and what's happening. And Adam Neumann, like they're actually been acquiring apartment buildings in Florida. And then my friend Cliff, who sort of has an expertise in property management. So we're going to look at around stuff about like prop tech, property technology, and space colonization, which isn't exactly Cliff's thing, but I thought it would be fun. So anyway, and then we're going to sort of have a beginning piece and an end piece. And I think our goal would be to maybe put them out a couple a week for 3 weeks. And hopefully people will get up to speed, because I think for me, I had actually been doing a lot of research early on around affordable housing and pay for success finance. The early phases, these early pilots were coming out of like third sector capital partners and social finance and HUD, specifically around returning citizens and people who had been incarcerated. So there was money to sort of do transitional housing for certain types of people, and those were the early pilots. But I think moving forward, the built environment is the game board. The built environment that is full of sensors is the massive outside-in robot that is the game board that these global hedge funds are going to be betting on our behavior. And so as we sort of walk through this, I think there were a lot of questions when WeWork was sort of, it didn't fully collapse. It still existed, but the first round, the IPO failed, and that was taken down so that, as I see it, Adam Neumann could spin off his smart city, smart neighborhood, multifamily housing side project, all of with the support of SoftBank, which is very interested in triggering the Singularity, I guess. So, yeah,
there's a lot to cover.
It's a lot to cover. So this is sit back and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, great.
Right.
Well,
yeah,
perfect.
So, okay, so throughout the documentary, which we rewatched this past week, everyone's like, what was that company? Like, what was really going on? It was like a crazy unicorn thing that we don't even know. And they kept saying, like, you're a real estate company. And Adam Neumann kept saying, no, I'm a tech company. And they're like, you're not a tech company, you're a real estate company. And so there is sort of this tension about like what actually was WeWork, and what does, depending on how you understand WeWork, it has implications for Flow, which would be WeWork applied to your life, to your education and to your healthcare, and for like where you cook your dinner and go to the bathroom and go to sleep. So this first section that Jason and I are going to do, I sort of framed out as real estate or the Singularity. So this first slide is just sort of the introduction. We talked about it a bit. A16Z is Andreessen Horowitz's investment firm. So, they're calling it a real estate startup because people don't actually have a word for the outside-in robot yet. They might call it surveillance tech or surveillance capitalism. But for now, everyone just defaults to real estate because most people think they understand real estate. But it's because they don't actually understand impact finance and Web3 technology and the way the places we live and the places we work are going to feed these markets. And so I'm going to run this first clip. These are mostly just a minute or two. This is sort of the introduction of the 1 hour talk with Andreessen Horowitz. Now, this was just posted a couple weeks ago, even though I think it was done probably sometime later last year.
As we're having the discussion, one of Marc's partners asked me, Adam, are you raising money? And I said, I'm not sure. We're going to build this one on our own. I'm not sure, because one of our lessons was you got to choose your partners really carefully. And he said, well, maybe you should consider us. Let us look into the business and see if it's interesting. And if so, maybe you should consider us. And then DG led a very rigorous diligence process. And they asked us a lot of questions and learned everything about our business. And as we were getting to know Andreessen, I realized that these are the kind of partners that I was always looking for, but never really knew that existed. So to answer your question, I was always building it, but building it with a partner was something that only happened because of this team and because of the way I met them. And I can just tell you that we had our first board meeting, and 1 minute afterwards, Marc called me and said, Adam, can I give you some feedback? I said, of course, Marc. He said, well, when your team said this and this and this, I don't agree with that. Let me tell you why. And here's the experience I have, and here's what I want to warn you from. So I welcome the feedback. I'm so excited to be a partner. I'm excited to be back in the game, not alone, but with a team. And we're just getting started, but the future there's a lot of potential.
He says he was always building it too. That was
he was always building it. Okay, so I would categorize Adam Neumann, and I will say, it's interesting symbolically. It's an interesting name, Adam, right? And then Neumann, right? And because ultimately, I think that this is sort of heading towards a remaking of people as data, as digital twinning. So the Adam Neumann is an interesting name. And I would say the way it's been framed out in all of the documentaries and the TV shows, like he's a very, distinctive individual, very suave, very, he has a certain, look, this very photogenic, like youthful, entrepreneurial. And so like I see him as an actor on the stage of this, someone who is meant to embody this entire company, so that we're not necessarily looking too closely at what the company is, rather that we're looking at the person who was leading it, both for WeWork, and I think the same will be for Flow. That this is the stage man, the magician up in front, setting up the tricks on everyone. And so we're so captivated by looking at and like being absorbed by the drama and the personality that we're distracted from the things we should be paying attention to. And in that, I think it's kind of like an Elon Musk scenario. I don't know. Would you agree, Jason?
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel as well. I mean, it's a hard thing to like prove per se, but you see all these things happening behind the scenes, and then you see what's left out. Like you said, the fact that like I've been delving into all of like the popular culture presentation of this story, and like lacking, again, like you said, they presented as a real estate company when they were actually just leasing. Anyway, but they're leaving out all the data stuff. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you see that there's this whole data side to this, which feeds into cybernetics. So yeah, I agree. Like I think that he's a character, and it's and it doesn't even make sense. Like they're just going to just throw like billions of dollars at this dude. I mean, this story doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. I mean, unless you're supposed to come into it like a play, right? The plot thickens. And so like, it's interesting because you had mentioned in the beginning, the emphasis on community, right? This idea of you're joining a community or a collective, and we're all in this together. And I think there was a big branding throughout the documentary of like, do what you love. This is all, it's not just work, it's love, it's togetherness, it's all of that. And so much of the work we've been doing over the last few months, like through the winter, has been around this idea of the ant computer and eusociality and E.O. Wilson and the global brain superorganism and, the colony, right? The colony, the hive. And so these are sort of like physical embodiments of the hive. And so Adam Neumann actually grew up in Israel. Now, he went to school in New York City, but he grew up in Israel. Evidently, he bounced around a lot of different places growing up, and he spent some time as a young adult in a kibbutz. And then, everybody there does military service, but he was in the Navy, which is, I think, many of these technologies are connected to radar and forecasting. So he has this background of like the communal, right? Which I would say for me, the primary lens I'm using right now is that of sociobiology and game theory and prediction markets and high level math. But if you one of the angles, because it's sort of like how you preemptively diffuse conversations or misdirect conversations, is that if the collectivism narrative goes so far, like people who might identify as not in alignment with collectivism, how that represents, might be able to discount it as something that is socialist or connected to Israel or connected to some other category that will make it more easy to critique or dismiss than to talk about it like the ant computer. And so it's interesting because he and his partner both came from growing up at least certain points in time in collectivist settings. But it's quite interesting because they have like a certain, backstory to that collectivist lifestyle that they had. And it's something that comes with its own baggage attached, for good or bad. But it actually, I feel like having the character fronting the collectivist who has this backstory actually is convenient, because at some point, if people come up and start to critique it, they're likely to critique it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I have a couple of clips here. They're short. Sure. Can I just share a couple? Okay, so these are just a couple short clips from the documentary on Hulu.
And we went out to build a business that's going to change the way people work, that's based on community and redefine success. The world has shifted. It used to be an I world, right? iPhone, iMac, all about me, me, me. If you take the me and you flip it and you get the we, you understand that we're about to change the way people work and way people live, but more importantly, change the world. Hey guys,
you saw that
this is WeWork, the world's first physical social network.
What's that? Did you want to, sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to point out that it says ecosystem, right? Office space versus ecosystem. And some of the stuff that I want to talk about later with Leo is this idea of energy tracing through systems and ecological niches and networks. So I believe that it's significant that the positioning of that word as the future is an ecosystem, that we live as a collective ecosystem. And you can see on the little, this is supposed to be them sketching out the future, right? Like you've got, it's interesting because it does say we, but then there clearly is an individual who would be the agent in the game, right? There's an agent who's isolated by all his data: travel, health, work, life essentials, friends, support, social life. Like they're all units of data that are surrounding this individual. So yeah.
Definitely.
Hey guys, this is WeWork, the world's first physical social network. Our mission is to empower the world through collaboration. We know that the future of the world is in small business, not in corporate America. So we're building a community that's transparent and that's accountable. That is WeWork.
Okay.
So there's a lot of code words there. The transparent and accountable, that would be your ledger, right? That would be the distributed ledger technology. And the future, right? The future is small businesses. Now, he's in this mass loft space of people. So the small businesses aren't mom and pop shops on a walkable main street. Like the small businesses he's talking about, and they go through and they profile a number of the people who are, renting space or members of WeWork. And pretty much they're all doing like technology products, like apps or some sort of technology-based service provider. And I would say when we're at this phase, and not to say that there's not an economic imperative behind this, but in terms of that the end game is to get as much data as possible, to have the most agile, flexible, reconfigurable set of businesses, right? Like you could pop up a business and then collapse it. And, even if you start to look at people's LinkedIn profiles, I mean, if someone is at a place 3 years now, it's like, wow, that's a long time. I mean, people have on their LinkedIn, places they've been for 4 months. They might have in 1 year, they've got multiple jobs at so it is very intense in terms of all these little bits and pieces. But I think that has a lot to do with this imperative towards complex adaptive systems, like towards emergence, that the idea that you're going to go and work for either a corporation or a government or, a civil society entity or something like that, and you're going to make your career, and maybe you'll have 2 or 3 career changes over, 30 years or so. That's just not the case anymore. And I think it's not just the case for the economics. I think it's not the case because they actually want people destabilized and creating new value in these small units that are highly reconfigurable, which is exactly the kind of thing that WeWork was set up to enable. And once we understand that the environment in which that those enterprises or pop-up enterprises are happening are literally under total digital surveillance, and that the data is being siphoned off into some other use, like we can see that it's actually an organism. Like these floors of offices are designed as 4-dimensional organisms, right? Like there's some stability in terms of people who might show up regularly, but it's always evolving in the space over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole social physical network thing I thought was interesting phrasing. Social physical network.
Right.
And again, it's like this. It's the merging of like the physical world with the digital world, and that's part of the what we're headed is the there's not as much of a delineation between the two
right
anymore. So
definitely. All right. So Andreessen Horowitz, is the partner in this Flow enterprise. Again, the narrative is sort of like, after I had this fallout and I had to leave my company, after a year or so, Marc called me up and just said, hey, Adam, you get back up, if you're in the game, you're going to get punched, but, everybody gets punched, and it's just when you're going to get back up and check us out, right? As if they'd never encountered one another, before, right? That this all just happened as a friendly chat, and then they just decided to go into business together. But central to this is this idea that Andreessen Horowitz is not just investing in technology, but is investing in Web3 blockchain AI technology. So it's the next generation of tech. It's not just any kind of old software systems. It's literally Web3 and then the financial systems that are going to be enabled by the Web3 systems. And so that's something that people need to start to get a handle on, is what does Web3 mean? I mean, most of the stuff that we're talking about lately is really Web3 centric. This idea that the sensor network, the internet, has come out of the screen, out of your phone, out of your wearable, and it's actually connected to physical built environment in the land, and that becomes the game board. So the fact that Andreessen Horowitz is the partner is significant. And in fact, I wasn't aware of this until this morning, but evidently that when they signed up last year to back Flow, and again, we go back and forth a little bit between WeWork and Flow. This is the Flow project. So this is the post WeWork project that Andreessen Horowitz was in for $350 million. And at the time, I guess it was the largest check that they had ever, the biggest one-time backing that they had ever done to a company. So this sort of friendly chatter of and then they did their due diligence, and then we decided to work together, and we're all just so happy to be partners. There's something very big that is driving Flow. There's some very major intentions. If someone, after sort of the ostensibly public wreckage of WeWork, in the aftermath of that, is coming back with the largest check ever, and this is a very savvy investor that's leading the Web3 build-out space, among those leading the build-out space, they know something. They're not dummies. These people are not dummies, and they're not just nice guys who want to be friendly to somebody who had, something, made bad choices and ended up in the dustbin for a time. These are very savvy people.
Yeah, and also just how they paint Neumann, throughout the whole thing is just this wild and crazy guy who doesn't wear shoes, and he's partying, and he's hitting the bong all the time, and I mean, yeah, it doesn't add up.
It's just not adding up. So there was sort of a big deal when he left. So the ethos was all, we're in this together. There were many promises made to people who came into the business at lower than average salaries, but were promised stock options and various things like, get in on the ground floor with us and you'll be rich beyond your imaginings. And, it was the time like that does happen to people, right? So a lot of people like came in with the understanding that, again, they were building they were going to change the world, that WeWork, the ethos behind WeWork was going to change the world with, subscription-based gig economy office space. I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about like that, but that was the narrative. And then when the IPO, when they stepped back from their IPO and like then the money kind of the tap got turned off and then everything started to like fall apart. When he left, the major backer of WeWork was SoftBank. And so I think at one point they were saying you got $1.7 billion golden parachute. And then later they were like, no, it wasn't actually that much. It was some, other amount. But, hundreds of millions of dollars, this guy. And he's like, but I earned it. I earned all the, these hundreds of millions of dollars. So he left with a chunk of money, whereas almost everybody else lost their jobs, even though it's still going. But, it dramatically shrunk. And so many people who had been made promises and offered community, it didn't end up being what they thought it was going to be.
Well, even on the show, there was a scene, and I'll have to find the clip, but there's a scene where they're like, the board wanted to vote him out, and they're like, one guy's like, I don't know how they got the investor to agree to this, but he owns controlling shares. You can't vote him out. Like at one point, and they're like, I don't know how they're like scratching their heads. Like, I don't know how the investors agreed to this, like that they gave this guy this much power. And that's why he had this major power. So they had to buy him out. And so, yeah, it was just one of those, I'll find the clip, but it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, that was by design. It was, they don't just like give someone that much power.
Right. Well, they did because they wanted him to have the sole responsibility. Right. It wasn't that everyone made bad choices. It was just, right. Adam and his wife were and they were. So this is just an image taken from the series. Is this the one you watched, Jason?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's, I don't, how many parts, 10 parts or something.
Was it Apple?
Apple TV. Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam, the board voted this morning. We want you out.
Call the lawyers. Yeah, which one? All of them.
Well, I have no idea how you got your investors to agree to this, but your super voting shares give you 20 votes on each share. You basically control 65% of the vote on any corporate matter. So, you're right. They can't fire you.
Good.
Great.
Now we fire them.
So, we're in a bit of a pickle, aren't we? We need billions of dollars, right? And we need it in the next 8 weeks. So, who do we know? Well, we have at least one investor with pockets deep enough to do that. SoftBank.
They won't come in now. Not while Adam has the controlling vote.
He stepped down as CEO, but the prick still has the majority of shares.
Which means CEO or not, we can't override his vote.
Shit. That fucking wanker.
And so, again, right, this is several years after, I guess it sort of imploded in 2019. They're still bringing it back up. Like, there's a reason that they want this story in the public eye, and they want it to be a spectacle. And so I would say in the media these days, we are starting to sort of see it blurs the line between reality and fiction. And that's like increasingly with the metaverse and extended reality, it's like, is it real or is it not? It's a story of a story of a story. Like, how many like layers are there? But they're definitely crafting a narrative around this couple. Interestingly, like within the context of this new venture coming out.
Well, in the series too, it's interesting because on one hand, they're kind of showing him to be, sometimes irresponsible, but really visionary. So it's like it plays both sides. Like, part of the film, you're just like, oh wow, this guy's like, not doing right. But overall, I think the overall message was that he's a visionary, he's unorthodox, but kind of he was a little bit done wrong in terms of like not trusting the, you know, I don't know. It was kind of almost playing like both sides of the coin too. The series.
Yeah. Well, and so what I didn't realize till I started looking into it a little bit more was that so this was in March of 2019. So this was it fell apart later that year. But that spring, they actually called it the We Company, right? Because it was actually several ventures, not just the office space, and that the company was looking to expand into smart cities. So I'm just going to read this excerpt. This is from an article called "The We Company is Launching a Smart Cities Project," and it hired a Google executive to lead it. And it's from March of 2019. The move to launch a smart cities program, though, is in line with one of the company's non-spiritual missions to compile the world's largest data set on how people work and live. And it goes on to say, WeWork has created the physical world equivalent of a digital platform. And that was by the author of The Sharing Economy. And of course, in 2019, we weren't all familiar with what the sharing economy actually meant, or the circular economy, or the Internet of Places. But this is happening against the backdrop again of Alphabet Sidewalk Labs, the rollout in Toronto that was so controversial about the data surveillance. So that there was going to be this grab for data. So Adam Neumann insisted, throughout the documentary, that he was running a tech company. But the media continued to assert that no, it was a real estate company. And I think once you understand the intention to expand, that there was an intention before the company went into its downward spiral to expand into a city-based unit. It was never going to stay in offices. It was always meant they were going to leverage the expertise they developed in the office setting and apply it more broadly. And so that's the game board that is going to be coming through for the betting on behavior and the predictive analytics piece. And then this is also part of the same article. I think the same article. So the woman was Diane, I'm not sure, Eisner was the person who was going to run it. She was with Waze and Google. And so she was joining with, it says here, her team of engineers, architects, data scientists, biologists, and economists will create products and partner with local groups around the world to help address problems spurred by globalization, urbanization, and climate change. So, we keep hearing about the megacities, and the intention that is to put people into megacities. Although how a megacity is in any way sustainable is a little bit beyond me. I'm not a fan of sprawl either, but the idea that you're going to concentrate everything in one area seems a bit misguided.
I'm not so sure too, though, on that, because they want to have megacities, but also they do talk, even the flow, in that flow discussion, they talk about how, it can be more dispersed and people can live in their homes. So, do they have intentions to have some of these smaller setups in smaller communities as in addition to the mega cities? I don't know. There was some comment in that talk where you were grabbing clips from, where they mentioned that it doesn't need to be so concentrated.
Well, I think what I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but it feels like we're at a, he would say, the spore mode or whatever, like spreading out. The ethos of Silicon Valley is now ready to jump outside of California and sort of take over middle America. And I saw that when I was doing my work in Pay for Success Finance and around e-government and Michael Bloomberg's efforts in What Works Cities. And so our former mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter, when he left the mayor's office in Philadelphia, he joined Michael Bloomberg and became the pitch man for What Works Cities. And so what he would do would go around a lot of, not the biggest cities, but the mid-sized cities like Tulsa and Kansas City and these other, Nashville, and encourage them around open data, smart, sensor technology, open sourcing, everything, and what works government. Pay for success finance policy measures. And that was with the backing of the Harvard Kennedy School. So like they were priming these cities to take remote workers that were going to have this exodus from California. And you can kind of see, honestly, how the really sort of draconian policies that were put in place during the lockdowns gave cover for people to relocate. Right? Like many people, even the tech people, didn't want to live under the dictates that were being put in and the cost additionally. So they were ready to spread out. But I do think that there is this idea of like regional corridors of mega cities laid out. The Dallas to Tulsa corridor, like different, like the megalopolis of the Northeast, that a mega city isn't just one big city, but they are corridors of planned development with large sections that are going to be, I think that they have laid out where they want the development to happen. And it's not all going to be in the New Yorks and the Dallases and but they're going to direct it. And it's going to eventually like merge into these megalopolises, not unlike what we already have in the Northeast.
One, and I don't know how far you've gone into it. I kind of just started going into it, but the one that Microsoft in Arizona, they've already have a bunch of land down there. I forgot the name of the town.
Well, like Phoenix, I'm sure is
Well, this is the one where they want to literally build it. There's like nothing there, and they want to like build the whole thing, smart city completely from scratch.
Yeah. I wanted to go there when I was there this past summer, but I didn't have time. It was. I think it's on the west side of town, and it was too far.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll go see it.
Maybe I'll swing by on my way back.
Swing by and look at the empty space for now.
Yeah, maybe there's an office there.
But yeah, but look at the team, right? It's not just architects, but the data and biologists and economists. And so that's the thing I keep trying to emphasize is this idea of markets and engineering and data are going to be applied to sort of this evolutionary imperative. Like it's an it's like free markets, like libertarian free markets plus biophysics, and it's kind of unsettling. And then you're going to be like optimized by your environment. And then it goes on to say, so their new brand is to elevate the world's consciousness, to build a world where no one feels alone. And then they also have this education group, and to unleash every human's superpowers. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later about the revisiting the Sorry to Bother You and the horse people. But, even Juan Benet with Protocol Labs, they're all about the superpowers. There's something in the narrative that needs to go hand in hand that, okay, no, it's not eugenics. We're just giving you superpowers, right? We're unleashing your collective.
Well, and the whole thing of I know a lot of people feel lonely in this world, but they're not, it's surveillance. Yeah, no one will ever be alone.
Right.
You're going to want to be alone at some point.
The co-living, the we live and the we grow. What they're building are colonies, and termite colonies and ant colonies. They're building, there's a very sophisticated structure that goes with that. So, they know what they're doing. And so my sense is that they needed Adam to spin off and to scale this piece, right? It was never going to just stay at WeWork. So let the guy who, down the road manage the business part. We're going to collapse the school and living part because we're going to rebuild it in this new form. But we need it to actually happen within the context of multifamily neighborhood-based colony construction. And so we're going to move Adam over. He's going to leave. We're going to give him some money to play around with, just to play around with some starter investments in the companies that will support these new neighborhoods. And then Marc shows up, and then they've got the bigger money, right? The bigger guns. And then they're going to go after remaking this. And I'm going to talk about this later on, but I really do believe that the opportunity zones, which were the 20% of every governor had to identify 20% of every low-income census tract in their state as a reinvestment zone, not just for laundering global money into real estate. And it wasn't just real estate, it was businesses around human improvement, coding boot camps and charter schools. But and I think that's the thing, Jason, that's so hard to think about is that like I live, a 10-minute walk from an area that was blighted and redlined on purpose. Like it was a predominantly black homeowners who intergenerationally owned their homes. Like, and then the riots of the civil rights era, like blasted things out, and then they could never rebuild because the banks could never get loans. And now the prices are so depressed and it's so blighted and everything's been knocked down that like the city's already paid for most of the demo, right? They've almost got a blank slate to come in and just rebuild these hive things as a huge tax shelter for these companies, these global companies. If you hold things for 10 years, you don't even have to pay capital gains on your investment. So like, it's just shocking, but I know we often talk a little bit about like understanding that the whole system is not what we thought. And then if you can't get your mind around that and like hold it, right, like to not be crushed by that knowledge and keep going, like we're never going to get there.
Yeah. That's my frustration too. It's like people just cannot fathom that there is a larger plan, that like this legislation is connected to this thing way over here, or this thing in the future, which implies that, they conspired together to come up with this. They just think of all these individual things that are happening independent of one another, and there's no connection. And, the idea that they're having an understanding of redlining and how like they intentionally destroy communities in order to rebuild them back up. That is such a hard thing for people to wrap their mind around.
The people who have the money can make the money. Like if you have money, you can make money. Like, I mean, just again, like a little ways, a 15-minute walk from me, Ridge Avenue was literally blasted out. And it was the center in much of the 30s and 40s of like the black music industry and recording industry in Philadelphia. And yeah, they just blasted that thing out. Now, about 8 years ago, they flipped the switch. And then all of a sudden everything came up. Like everything, all of a sudden you've got like 6-7 story prefab, like, multifamily mixed development housing out of nowhere, all at once. It wasn't like, there was somebody who had a legacy, a bunch of holdings and who died and then they finally turned them. No, someone just said, okay, now we're doing it. And then you could see over the course of 5 years, that entire corridor was changed. But I don't think it was changed because of the actual economic conditions. It was changed because somewhere they were just like, okay, now this is the time to turn this part on.
Yeah, and it's inorganic and it's artificial. Like it's, and that's what people have been conditioned to think of markets. Oh, what's the market doing? The market is for us down here, but it's not really a market. I mean, there's so much going on in terms of, pulling different strings to make things happen. Like you said, all of a sudden this thing happens all at once.
Right.
And look at all the money that has been created since 2020, since this whole health crisis thing,
Exactly. Well, and I do want to point out in this clip, they talk about partnering with groups to address things like climate change. So that's later on when we talk with Leo about flow carbon. So your behavior in the game is going to be linked to some metrics of climate change. And then your wellness metrics of how you behave like in the game and how your response to being in the game and your mental health or your physical health or your level of skill building will all be incorporated into this overall like dynamic calculation of society. So also when they say no one feels alone, that also means when he says we have built a real social network, a physical social network, it means that like all of the people that you have relationships to are also going to feed into this dynamic web of visualizations of influence, like spheres of influence. And that all of that data is going to be fed into something that is like a machine learning algorithm.
Well, and think about like even just social media and children, how they've like, it's changed their interactions with one another because everything is so public. You do something and so, some other kid posts a thing and, there's a whole thing about online bullying and all whatnot. But like, it changes us of who we are as human beings when we have no privacy and we're in these systems, these social physical systems, you know?
Oh, and then so Diane, she went on. Now the company she works for is trying to solve labor shortages. So she's in the labor industry now, and I'm sure that they have apps for that. So that's all of the reskilling. And this is just a little bit more about the data. They're talking about the power of aggregated information. Like We has data, lots and lots of data. The power of aggregated, because it's the relationality. And that's what Web3 brings to the conversation, right? It's not just siloed data. All of the narratives around surveillance capitalism are largely meant to obscure the need for a interoperable digital identity that will be sold to you as privacy and sovereignty making, to usher in the next phase, which is, how does what you ate for breakfast equate to how productive you were at work? They need, over time, like bazillions and bazillions of data points, but it all has to hang in one place. So the old model of silo data isn't just a problem because people are making money off of us or whatever. It's a problem for them because they couldn't sort it all out. They couldn't find the patterns because the AI is all about finding the pattern recognition and making the predictions. And in its current format, our data isn't particularly useful for machine learning because it's not interoperable. It's not organized and structured in a really good way. So the Web3, which is, again, what Andreessen Horowitz specializes in, is all of their companies, that's what they're backing, is the interoperability. So that's the aggregated information. And so it says, WeWork, they're trying to get Eisner all the data she wants. They're getting data off of the co-working offices, the co-living, the schools, and the wellness centers, but it actually has started acquiring companies to get data on just their only, like to pull in those silos of data, legacy data. So Meetup, which is a platform for meeting up, I guess, and it's 18 years of how people gather offline. So that's managing the Ant computer. Like that's looking at the social colonization project. It says they acquired Team, which is workplace analytics, Euclid, which is a startup that uses Wi-Fi to understand how people move through physical space. And again, that's one of those things. It's like when the technology becomes invisible, when these things are mostly just like low-key beacons and they're tracking us based on our phones, and we might even just think, oh, it's just a security camera, it's just something, but we don't understand how all of the data is being aggregated, right, to predict what we will do next. And then later it says that in addition to just their business model, what she brought into it when she was working at Waze, which was a connected citizens program, so it was a data exchange used by 800 cities in traffic. And then she was working for Google with this Area 120, a workshop for their experimental projects. So later on, they like one of the things about Flow, they were talking about, working with governments, on wellness metrics for people. So, and at the end here, it says Eisner and Ben Shetrit bring some of the optimism and innovation of the tech sector to a company whose business model still looks by and large like that of a real estate company. Again, they wrote a whole story about data, and then they close out with, but it's a real estate company.
Yeah. And again, like the documentary, the series doesn't mention, I don't think it mentions at all the data side. I have to go through it again, but I don't remember any mention of any of that.
Yeah. Well, and so this is a slide that talks, it's an article that says WeWork wants to turn office buildings into giant gadgets. Co-working company uses beacons to track members. Now, I doubt regular people even really understand what a beacon is. And the creepy thing is, so it says that the guy who's in charge of this, they're using one of their office spaces, this was early on, as a testing site. And he envisioned that the ideal office building would be like an iPhone, all parts connected and governed by technology. So that's the Web3 infrastructure. And then this is quite something. So they go on and they say, so they're testing these beacons to track people's movements through their phones. So if you don't have a smartphone, I'm presuming you can't get in. You can't get in, you're not going to be able to, because you need to access the app to pay for it. And it says in the space, it will track you through the space based on your phone. And then it says, this is a quote from the article, if, for example, a member walks into a conference room she hasn't booked, her phone will instantly buzz with a notification offering to book said room via the WeWork app. So literally your phone is your reminder, like, oh, you're not supposed to be in there. You didn't pay for that. Like, don't,
Yeah.
And so like, how collegial is it? Like everybody's collegial in the co-working space, only your phones know, like, I don't know, what is it, like the pig, who's superior, who's the top, everyone's equal, but some of us are more equal than others. Like I have the conference room app, and it's all the subscription model. Like you've talked about the subscription model and like add-ons for a while. Do you want to like maybe say anything about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I deal with it with the software that's real frustrating because, I like to buy a software and just keep it for a long time, but we're moving into this place where you're going to have to just keep paying. Paying on a regular basis aside, if you have a slow month, you're like, oh, I've got to borrow some money so I can do my work.
Right.
But not only that, with the terms, the biggest thing that I don't think people acknowledge is just the terms and conditions, the how much is involved with that. Like nobody reads through all that stuff and it's constantly changing. And I've talked about this before. It was kind of like people would just kind of do things on their own, regardless. And we're going to be moving into a world where these things are going to be enforceable, automated and enforceable, just automatically.
Yeah. Automate,
what is, just like this place, you would think, oh, there was a clip in the documentary, which I still need to pull up, but, where this guy basically, was kicked out. You're here supposedly as an independent entrepreneur in this space. And they, this guy had not, follow the terms and conditions, and they use just generic phrases like you got bad energy, or you're not bringing the happiness quotient up, or whatever. It's ridiculous. But they're like you signed this contract when you entered into this thing, so you're not just renting space. And so, moving into like rental homes or, all this, as they move these models into other aspects of our lives, and there'll be a lot of conveniences and there'll be some positive things up front, but it's like you're entering into these agreements that you don't even understand that you've really maybe taken into consideration.
Well, and sometimes you've mentioned too, they'll change them up on you, right? They'll send an email and just say, oh, we've updated our terms and conditions. And if you don't read through the whole thing, you don't know. And,
No, actually, if you don't get your lawyer to read through it, because you're not going to understand what it says anyway.
But I think they pitched it like, oh, like we're one big happy family all hanging out in this office space and it's so friendly and everything. But the reality is like there's tiered levels of assets like all built into this. So then this slide that I have, it's from last year. It was an article in the Architectural Record. And so I think it's important to consider both WeWork and then Flow within the context of Sidewalk Labs, which again was a trial at a smart city project. Now it's interesting because it really didn't happen. Like they had many of these kind of fantasy-like architectural renderings that they didn't really have the capacity to execute these super futuristic, quote unquote, sustainable things that plans were to embed like technological, data gathering into everything. And it was in Toronto. And I think it was about a 12-acre community. It started in 2017. So Sidewalk Labs was a subsidiary of Google. And it's important to know that actually Sidewalk Labs is headquartered at Hudson Yards, because later we'll be talking a little bit about Stephen Ross and related companies. But many of the people who are sort of at the high levels of this sort of Web3 built environment, human capital finance are involved in this, in our tenants at Hudson Yards. So Sidewalk Labs, they're trying to build a whole neighborhood in a country they're not even based in, and they don't really have it all together, and it doesn't happen. But there's a lot of pushback around the data collection. And, they called it the digital layer. In the article, it says the digital layer, as Sidewalk called it, immediately generated headwinds. In Toronto, the conversation soon became all about the data. who would gather it, who would use it, and how. Sidewalk and presumably Alphabet wanted quasi-governmental powers in this respect. Local good governance advocates and technologists stood up to prevent what they saw as an abrogation of local government's role. Sidewalk Toronto is not a smart city, said the former BlackBerry executive Jim Balsillie. Oh, interesting. Okay, Balsillie, because he was in the Jordan Peterson thing. That's the Balsillie. That's the guy from the government, the What Works Government Canada Innovation, who is part of INET. So okay, I recognize that name. Okay, so he wrote in a 2018 op-ed, "It is a colonizing experiment in surveillance capitalism attempting to bulldoze important urban, civic, and political issues. Of all the misguided innovation strategies Canada has launched over the past 3 decades, this purported smart city is not only the dumbest, but also the most dangerous." That year, Flessig was pushed out as CEO of the Waterfront Agency. So it's quite interesting to me that Jim Balsillie is the one calling it a colonizing experiment in surveillance capitalism. Because literally, BlackBerry were the early surveillance tech devices. Like, we thought of them as communication devices, but actually they were the first round of trackable surveillance tech. And the fact that Balsillie and his, I'm trying to remember the other guy's name, and it's skipping my mind, but essentially the two founders of BlackBerry then leveraged their assets into government innovation, which is Balsillie, backed with Soros and INET. And then the other guy was backing the Perimeter, which was a quantum computing center, and Perimeter was theoretical physics. So they've got like high level science meshed with government innovation. And so when I look at what happened, because you know that this happens for a reason, right? To advance the narrative. And, you know, I think we're coming up on ETH Denver, you know, and looking at, there's always the plan B, Jason, right? And so the plan B is not Google plan, right? The plan B is like our collective empowerment to use our data to fix the climate and be happy, right? Like, and so the Sidewalk Labs, because I don't know how much money they were really out on this, like besides having egg on their face. Like, it's not, you know, Google has more money than anybody to do this, but they needed to be able to lean into the Web3 version, which is like, don't let Google run the smart city. We need a digital commons with DAO democracy and tokens, and we want our well-being, you know, if we're going to have this surveillance, we want to at least be happy, for goodness sakes, you know. Right. And I can just see this narrative being set up, and I think that, you know, it'll be interesting to see how Flow, you know, advances, like with their own narrative. Will it be in contrast to Sidewalk Labs? Like, how are they going to spin it? Because to me, this was everyone thought they won, like, and that's what I learned from the standardized testing fight is like, when they pulled back from the testing, we're like, oh, everybody wanted to say we won. And I'm like, no. We're moving into ed tech. It's testing all the time. It's data surveillance all the time. We didn't actually win. They let us win to move on to the next phase of development. So I feel like
we didn't know the game.
We didn't understand the game.
Well, and also too, I know like they can do these things too to kind of test the public's reaction, or, you know, they can also they can collect information about how people are going to send it. That's it. Yeah. I'm sure they have it all stored away. I mean, they're Google, right? So they probably have all of the like op-eds or the outrage or whatever about it, so that they can figure out how to position it better the next time. Yeah.
And clearly Balsillie is, I mean, he's in for government innovation. So, you know, to me, that is starting to look like, you know, he's not just writing it because he is a disinterested party. He's a very interested party in having innovative governance involved in some fashion. So, so, you know, part of the big drama of this was sort of the lead up to, they were being backed by all of these companies, millions, tens of millions, billions of dollars flowing in. SoftBank was one of the largest backer, and, you know, they just gave a bunch of money and said, go crazy with it, right? I want everything to be crazy. And so, but then the time came that the plug got pulled, right? And Mayoshi-san of SoftBank said, oh, I'm sorry, this deal we thought we were going to do, I can't do it now. And then they had to look for money. And so then they were going to go for this IPO, But it's interesting because in the film, and if you actually read it, it's over the top. Essentially, like there's all of these sections where you're supposed to say what could go wrong with your company. Like if you invested, like what could go wrong, like all of the things that might be detriments to your company, like problems that you have. And it went on for like 3 pages. And I think at the time, like when it was released publicly, like it became such a social media phenomenon that people would share the different sections of the IPO that they were like appalled by, like how terrible it was. And so supposedly this terribly written and presented IPO was like the beginning of the end for Adam Neumann and his wife.
And there's like a whole like episode pretty much all about like the writing of the IPO, and they're like, we don't need to do it the old way, we're going to do it our visionary way, and then like the bankers are like, no, you can't do that, they're like, you've got to like, this is a technical document, you can't go off the rails. And then they're like, well, maybe, there's an interesting scene, not scene, but it almost takes up a whole episode, the whole writing of this document.
Do you know what an S1 is?
I worked on Wall Street, Adam. I know what an S1 is. It's a company's introduction to the world, its mission statement, its raison d'être.
Precisely. The lawyers and the bankers will debate the fine print, but we need to make it our own. It's got to be a living, breathing thing, and it must tell the story of we. These more dead things from the lawyers. Take a look.
Risk factors? 1, our rapid growth may not be sustainable. 2, we have a history of losses, and if we continue to grow at an accelerated rate, we may be unable to achieve profitability for the foreseeable future.
And number 3, small men proceed from fear.
Adam, it's Bruce. What is this nonsense I'm hearing about you and Rebecca rewriting the S1? It's a very technical document, and you know what? I'm coming over. Hello?
WeWork's not a business, it's a feeling. We need to give people that feeling. We're not going to be able to do it with charts and graphs and acronyms. Even the right words can only get us so far. We need images.
Images.
Is that normal for an S1?
We need to immerse people. We need to give people that feeling that we all had that first night.
Wait, were you there that night? I don't remember you being there.
Our mission is nothing less than to elevate the world's consciousness. We invite you to join us in creating a better world, because we are just getting started.
That was our S1.
You're not going to back this, are you?
Maybe he's right. Maybe it's time for a new approach.
Well, see, so I think that that's a very iconic component of this. So now WeWork, Adam Neumann is out, like he's out of the thing. It's being run by whoever's, he left in 2019. This is 2021. And instead of doing an IPO, I guess there's a way of sort of cleaning things up through a SPAC, which is a special purpose acquisition company. And so a SPAC was created called BowX, which is it's an interesting name, Acquisition Corp, BOW and then capital X, Acquisition Corp. And then there's a press release here. WeWork and BowX Acquisition Corp announced the closing of a business combination to create publicly traded leading flexible space provider. And that was October of 2021. So WeWork, it was a way of transitioning them back into being publicly traded outside of the normal IPO system, although these SPACs are now increasingly common. And so in this, one of the sections that they were talking about as the assets of WeWork, it mentions that they have begun to realize new revenue by digitizing its real estate offerings and productizing its existing technology. And so for me, that is sort of, again, an indicator of that it was a platform technology company more than a real estate company. So that is something that they're bringing online. And then towards the end, it was talking about who was involved in the SPAC. And it says that UBS Investment Bank was the sole, served as the sole financial and capital markets advisor to BowX. And that that Morrison and Foster LLP were legal counsel to SoftBank Group. So both UBS and SoftBank were involved in this SPAC. They didn't go away. Like SoftBank didn't totally abandon it because it was their investment. Like they were going to get something out of it. But I think the UBS side is particularly compelling to me because when I started looking up social impact bonds, and this was early. This is 2018. That IXO Foundation with Sean Conway that Leo's written about quite a bit at Silicon Icarus, they had a very close collaboration with UBS Optimus. And they were actually developing not just social impact bonds, but smart social impact bonds on blockchain. And so there was an invitation to a gathering in 2017 to meet. And it says IXO Foundation and UBS Optimus Foundation will co-host a design workshop in Zurich to take the first steps towards designing smart impact bond mechanisms using blockchain and Web3 technologies. And then they're talking about innovative impact bond applications. And then there's another, because I was trying to remember who IXO was connected to in the space, and I couldn't find a direct connection to Andreessen Horowitz, but they're in the same pool with Cello and the refi market and the carbon trading. So, there was another article talking about the creation of impact tokenization in Thailand, where IXO was a partner with Cello and working to expand the credit model beyond carbon into diverse metrics of planetary health. So that's the biodiversity, but then increasingly, I think human behavior and quote unquote well-being will be positioned against climate metrics and ecosystem well-being. And that is the cybernetic game that we're in. And so, when I look back to understand better, like when UBS is coming into WeWork, to me, it seems very clear that the plan is to create tokenized finance mechanisms that are linked to how people are living and occupying these smart environments. And I just think it's really vital to understand this as a piece of finance, because I think ultimately, like IXO is also in Hong Kong, and I think that there is a tendency for us to want to lean into our old ways of knowing things. Like we want to make, and I've done this myself, but we want to find who is the problem here? Who is doing the bad thing? And can I put them in a category so I can know myself in relation to the bad thing in the category, right? And so that's how we start to say, well, wait a minute, is the problem capitalism or is it socialism? Is the problem, the West or is it China? And then by how you react to the entity you imagine being the problem or the source of the issue, then you feel more comfortable in how you proceed in the story. But if you are willing to consider that the story is about a global cybernetic program that's happening across all of them, that's threading all the needles across all of the categories, and that it's becoming automated, and it's being automated even as they promise us privacy, even as they promise us well-being. It is being automated through sensor networks in which we literally are interfacing huge parts of our lives through machines that are conditional based on behavior and money. It's a new paradigm. And I think people, I think that's some of the problem that we're having to get people, it's a hard learning curve, and you have to actually let go of the other stuff to get there, to start getting a position to actually look at it.
Yeah, I mean, right here, we're talking about WeWork and Adam Neumann and Marc Andreessen, but they're just even there. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I think that this is so much bigger, and it's popping up in so many different places, and so it's going to be hard to like nail down. It's like, oh, it's those people. This is like a case study, but I guarantee you, if we dig some more, we'll find other companies that are kind of going toward the same direction, as time goes on.
But it's global capital.
Right.
So like the idea that this is maybe just the West doing it, because again, I was coming at things from a more left-leaning space, and I still I haven't abandoned those values, but like it's not like China is not part of Web3 blockchain impact finance. Like they're as much after the children of China as anything. Now you might say, oh, is it capitalism doing that to China, or is it the Chinese doing it to China? Well, ultimately, like it doesn't really, to me, serve anybody like that much. I don't know to what extent it advances the program to try to pin it on somebody as the source of the problem if we're not actually stopping the problem, because it feels all pervasive. Like the idea of the global brain is that everyone in the world is a part of it.
Right.
So anyway, but I think that the climate, this aspect of ICSO, UBS, climate, and well-being metrics are all part of what Flow will be about. So one of the things that WeWork did was they worked with MasterCard actually to pilot a project where when you come into the space, you authenticate with an app your biometric ID, like your thumbprint. And then once you're in the space, like the clock is ticking and you're being charged for how much time you spend in the space. And I guess whatever, up charges you have. Now they would have something called an honesty store, and that you could pick up snacks or office supplies or things. And then it was all connected to sensors and beacons. So if you picked something up and used it, consumed it in some way, that would be debited from your account. And so it was a frictionless store. And so I included this slide today because it's actually a tweet from last year from something called Flutter. Flutter is one of the largest gambling enterprises in the world. It's based in Dublin, Ireland. And this was in Raul's earlier article about poker and crypto and offshore banking. And then I looked into it a bit more, and it actually had some connections with Susquehanna Investment Group. But when they built out their new Dublin headquarters, now this is an online gaming and gambling company, they had the first frictionless payment system in Ireland, right? And so what it says here is this is a tweet, Ireland's first ever completely frictionless store, Market times Flutter, open today in our newly renovated global headquarters in Dublin. The store uses AI-powered computer vision technology, allowing shoppers to purchase items without having to queue or stop to scan or pay. And so, to me, this is starting to feel like Black Mirror, not just in that it's conditional, like if you don't have anything in your account, like what happens, the doors are just locked. And there was that incident in Severance or whatever with the guy, and he's kind of having a breakdown, and he's like, I need tokens to eat, and it all is sort of behind closed, enclosures and conditional. But that it's connected to the gambling. So, if we sort of just look back again, this idea of a smart impact bond with Web3 and blockchain technologies, if you have a UBI, maybe you're allowed to do certain things in the frictionless payment store, but you're probably not allowed to do all the things there. And then how you interface with the smart technologies is going to reflect on your worth as human capital, right?
Well, if you don't have tokens, you probably won't even be able to walk into the store to begin with.
Well, there might be one cooler, in the Diamond Age with Neil Stephenson, there was a baseline thing of survival because we are data commodities. They don't actually want people dying on the streets. And so you might be able to get soy pellets from one, sad soy pellets that you could consume to keep you alive. These basic items that you could get from the Matter compiler were available to poor people. But if you wanted anything nicer than just the most basic, gruel, equivalent of gruel, you would have to have the tokens. And so I feel I just put up another post, the 5th in my series called God's Eye View, about Susquehanna Investment Group and the gambling and the gaming. So I think as we go through all of this, like really it is like LARPing in the CIA's video Inside Out robot video game. and it is all, I think, going to be tied into gambling, but not in a traditional sense. Like, because eventually the gambling is just going to be tied straight into the hedge funds. And then there's going to be these metrics that are going to be imagining like, well, we're just here to optimize you. We're here to optimize your genetic makeup. We're here to optimize your behavior. We just care for you, want you to be happy, right? And the world to be happy. We want to balance everybody's happiness with our cybernetic token systems and sensor networks.
Yeah, sign me up.
Okay, so a big chunk of this was talking about the impact of the lockdowns, of this hour-long talk that Adam Neumann had with Marc Andreessen. This is Marc Andreessen. So, and they're like, oh my gosh, like who would have imagined there would be 2 years of lockdowns? Can you believe it? Oh, and then we just had to change everything, right? We just, all of the things had to change. And so, you know, instead, and by the way, like people like working from home, right? So like we, you know, this is this new paradigm. And so if you imagine the surveillance tech of like happening in the gig economy floor, like eventually the idea is that the surveillance tech is ubiquitous and it comes into your house. And then it really starts to get all of the data. So this is him talking about this transition between the demolition of the corporate campus as we knew it, like the tech bro beanbag hoodie campus, into something else.
Yeah. Another thing too on the COVID thing was, on one hand, they pay lip service. They're like, oh, it was such a terrible thing, but it was such a great opportunity. You know, like you got like Tamika Tilleman and all these people. They're like, well, Eric Schmidt, or, you know, like you name it. Like they're all like, they know they have to kind of like, they can't get too gleeful about it. They're like, yeah, it was such a bummer, but there was a silver lining.
There's a silver lining.
All right.
Over the last 20, 25 years, it became very common to have this idea of the corporate campus, right? And you know, sort of Google maybe, you know, really kind of, you know, crystallized that in the culture. You know, basically this idea that a company's facility where everybody came every day was going to basically be a continuation of the college campus experience. And that led to kind of this, you know, perk bonanza, right? So you'd have this whole thing, go to this campus and it's like gourmet food 24 hours a day. And it's like they'll do your dry cleaning and they'll walk your dog. And there's, you know, the swimming pools and there's the ping. So there are these, you know, it basically is a self-contained environment. And the theory of it, right, was if we can get people, you know, especially these young people, like inculcate them, keep them in this kind of college campus kind of environment, then they'll work more, right? We'll get more out of them because they'll be here more often. You know, it's basically everything up to not usually including the actual bed. And so as a consequence, you have this thing where sort of young adults kind of stayed in this corporate campus environment. And then as a consequence, they had this incredible community, right? They had this incredible environment, right? Where they have, you know, all these friends, coworkers, colleagues, you know, their teammates, other people who work at the same company, they're going to lunch, going to dinner. And then you basically like drop COVID into that model and you just like detonate it, right? Which is what's happened, right? And then all of a sudden the experience of a kid going through that, all of a sudden it's like, nope, you don't get that. What you get is you get to sit in your studio apartment, right, in front of your laptop, right, and good luck, right? And you're like cut off from everything else, and like you've got DoorDash, and you've got Tinder, and like that's your life, and like that is not the same thing. You know, the spirit is like Elvis has left the building for these kinds of environments. Like this is not the way that most companies are going to operate. And so all of a sudden, the focus on where you live, the focus on what, you know, are you literally by yourself? You know, do you have roommates? Are you in a small, you know, complex? Are you in a big complex? Do you have any sense of connection whatsoever? Do you know who your neighbors are? You know, most people historically have lived in apartments. I don't think they generally would even know who the neighbors are, right? The guy next door is just the guy next door. You'd feel no connection. And so do you have anything in common with the people you're in the building with? And so there's this sort of whole model that an entire generation grew up with that has all of a sudden been detonated. And I don't know, maybe I'm radical. I think the idea of sitting in the apartment in front of the screen with DoorDash and Tinder is not a good life. And so that opens the door for reinvention.
That same serendipity feeling that you feel when you were to go in an office and connect to this, belongs in a home in a funny way more than it ever belonged in an office. And when you think of these apartment buildings, and it is a little sad. It's sad that there's an apartment building with 400 apartments, maybe 600-700 people, with a swimming pool and a kitchen and a gym and all these amenities that when if anybody here has ever been in a multifamily, you do this amazing tour, they show you all these amenity spaces, you never see anyone there. You then move into the building and not everyone, but a lot of people live the life that Marc is describing. And that's sad because I don't think human connection thrives. I actually think, I'm so happy we're here face to face. And COVID was obviously a horrible thing, but also a miracle at the same time.
Yeah, he tells the story about like, if you need butter, you just go to your neighbor's house and you just go walk in and you take it.
No, it's salt. And I have some slides about the salt. Yeah.
Oh, the salt, yeah. But I'm just like, okay, so like if I just walk into Adam Neumann's house and be like, yeah, I needed to borrow a bottle of wine.
But so I think what they're saying, right? So they curated work experiences. Like the tech corporate campus was a curated work experience for an elite class, right? The people who got the brass ring, for what it's worth, and they joined the Google campus or the what have you campus setting. But it was contained, and it was like a hive of activity. He later talks about it as a hive. So imagine, I think, this idea of shifting that into multifamily rental, and that like they're not going to have diversity like in the space. Like they want this idea of like eclectic and yet similarly organized at a class level all together in one place. And so I think like I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on, but this idea of the hive and the collective work environment, I think will have a number of different presentations from the high end, which is what they're talking about, down to like workforce housing level, which is like constant people scraping to buy to get reskilling, to people who are just really destitute and in very dire circumstances, which would be like the tiny house pod version. And so there are going to be these scales, and they want to come up, I think, with sort of an equation or a secret sauce of the social physics of how do you maximize the data and the emergent ideas at all of these different levels, and I can totally see it being sort of like, again, later on we'll talk about like the ethical cults, right? But like, which group do you belong in? There's a group, and then there's a pecking order, and then you find your way in, and then once you're in, it's everything for you. And Neumann is saying like all of that belongs in your house. Right? Like the serendipity belongs in your house. Like it actually doesn't, if you just stop and think about it, it doesn't actually make any sense. Like they're pointing out like, oh, we feel so bad for those kids that were stuck, young people stuck like with the DoorDash and all this stuff. But how is it exactly going to be different if you move everybody into your house? Like you're going to meet at the pool. Like that's sort of like you meet your wife at the pool now. Like it's just, and it's all under the control of the people who are designing the environment, which is being designed with very specific intentions and technologies. Yeah, so I want to just sort of reinforce the ant idea, right? Like ant nests have cells. They have specified production mechanisms and certain structures. And actually a lot of what they're talking about now in terms of new architecture is, bio-inspired design. And you don't have, your own family. You're just part of the collective, right? And you're working for the reproductive assets of the queen, laying the eggs, and it's all sort of communal. But I think that that's actually what's being built. And, as we've talked about a lot before, I just included here, I have an image of an ant nest, and then I have an image of this paper, multi-colony ant optimization with dynamic collaborative mechanism and cooperative gaming. And that was from last April. That was published in the Complex and Intelligent Systems journal. And so, yeah, I feel like what they're building is like multi-colony ant groups with dynamic collaboration as a cooperative gaming. Like there's going to be gamification aspects in all of this. And this is something I had touched on a while back when I was looking actually at this community inclusion currency that was part of a supposed art project in Finland that I do want to go back and talk about at some point. But they were talking about actor network theory, which the acronym happens to be ANT. and this theory is it's an anthropological approach in which it says everything in the social and natural world exists in constantly shifting networks of relationships. Thus, there are no external forces beyond what and how the network participants interact at present. Objects, ideas, processes, and any other relevant factors are just as important in creating social situations as humans. And then it goes on to say it is known for its controversial insistence on the capacity of non-humans to act or participate in networks, and is associated with forceful critiques of conventional and critical sociology. Just really emphasizing that in the social and natural world, that is human and non-human actors that are in these shifting networks of relationship that are all equivalencies. It says ANT challenges many traditional approaches by defining non-human actors as equal to humans.
Yeah,
And
think
so
about
I feel
democracy
like-
and too in terms of that mentality, and thinking about like how this is going to be democratic, but you have all these non-human actors. I don't know. Maybe that's...
Yeah, no, I mean, well, it's like but the building will be an actor, right? Maybe a floor will be a unit. The door, the smart door, the smart toilet, like everything will be an item in relationship to other
What
things.
on the ecology or carbon credit, whatever front, the tree being an actor or whatever,
right?
Based on some
and that's why
pre-programmed.
they need the wallets. Right. So we're in order to have this network theory and to track the relationships, we all have to have unique signifiers, and then we all have to have some sort of like energetic being tracked across. So I think this idea of actor network theory and smart environments as being giant gamified robots in which the exchanges are tracked in ledgers is a really key aspect, and the fact that it's actually named ANT is kind of funny.
Yeah.
So let me see if I push this again, if it will start.
Wasn't
So this is
there
just a
ANT
short-
tokens too?
Yeah, the ANT tokens. This is not a super great clip, but it's one of the shorter ones about ANT theory. So let me see if it will start. Oh, it will.
To start off with, we have technique and ourselves, humans. When
Years.
studying networks, there often is a focus on purely technological or social aspects which are said to form the network. For example, technological determinist approaches assume that all outcomes of technological change can be attributed to the technological rather than the social. On the other hand, social determinism argues that technological changes can only be explained by social categories. To overcome this, the actor network theory considers both technical and social determinism to be flawed, and proposes instead a social-technical account in which neither social nor technical positions are privileged. I present you actor network theory in plain English. The actor network theory derived from the work of Bruno Latour and others to treat human and non-human agents, called actors, as equal, since separation between those elements is difficult. For example, when talking about mobile phones, we could wonder which part results from human interactions and which part results from technology. It seems difficult to differentiate the technical aspects from the way in which a software development team responsible for the technique is influenced by their socio-cultural background. Thus, what seems to be social is partly technical, and what may appear to be only technical is partly social. To address the need to treat both human and non-human actors fairly, actor network theory is based upon three principles: agnosticism, generalized symmetry, and free association, which means in short that there is made no distinction in approach between the social, the natural, and the technological. When we take a closer look, an actor isn't just an object, but an association of heterogeneous elements. themselves constituting a network. To look like a single-point actor, these elements may be simplified or black-boxed. To be black-boxed means that network actors are opened and their contents reconsidered. This fits the idea that networks are always reliable and can become unstable. Although the actor network theory is being criticized for various reasons, the main point of this theory is that it explores the ways in which the networks of relations are composed, how they emerge and come into being, how they are constructed and maintained, how they compete with other networks, and how they are made more durable over time. I am Lucky, and this was Actor Network Theory in plain English.
Interesting. Yeah, I noticed too, they said the social and then the technical, but then at one point she throws in the Natural, yeah. So, but that would seem to be downplayed in this particular video. But that was also another interesting piece of it, where like you're not actually making any distinction between these things.
Yeah.
Right.
But can you see, like, in the concept of flow, how like it would be a network? It would be energy flowing through a network. I think that's a very intentional framing. And then the techne, that will be the facilitator, right? And so now everybody's, sort of dealing with the whole chat GPT stuff and whatever. That would be like a network, right? Like that would be a non-human actor interacting socially. But then the actor network theory would be like, what was the society that led to the creation of that thing in the first place? And then, everything's getting murkier. What's alive and what's not alive, and I mean, not for me really, but
it's reductive. It is, no matter how you look at it, you're either reducing the natural world or you're reducing humanity to the technology. Which, I mean, I don't think the technology is being reduced per se, but it's really the natural world and us that are being changed to fit the technology, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and so this slide, I think I had sent this article to you earlier. We're going to talk a little bit more about new urbanism later, this idea of smart cities. And, as someone who did like graduate coursework in city planning, and who actually really appreciates the walkability of, I'm in Philadelphia and I live near downtown, and it is sort of these, we do have a human scale walkable neighborhoods, and it was something I really valued, but not understanding early on the idea of like pre-planned communities that would incorporate all of this, would emerge into sort of smart city 15-minute communities, like with surveillance. And so there was a firm that was based in Salt Lake City. And again, we've been really paid a lot of attention to what's happening in Salt Lake City because of their, the technology that's there, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is very invested in the technology and the biotechnology and sort of the state intelligence apparatus, and the fact that Brigham Young University is very central in digital identity. And so in 2013, the Congress of New Urbanism had their annual conference in Salt Lake City. And there was a firm there called Community One that I think is like a city planning firm, but is sort of steeped in more of a spiritual practice. And in this, they're talking a lot about new urbanism, and in it they describe. I'll just quote from one of their papers. It says, "The point was further driven home to me as I read Eric Jacobson's book, The Space Between: A Christian Engagement with the Built Environment. Eric describes the relationship between people and places through a comparison to hardware and software." This is a quote within the article. "We can think of the requisite components of community, therefore, in terms of hardware and software. Hardware refers to the buildings and other physical aspects of a particular place. Software refers to the people who enact the communal activities and practices in that place. Another term for the software component is agent." We talk about agent a lot. "The question of who causes or prevents community from forming is a question of agency." And then it says, "New urbanism masterfully provides the hardware that religion and faith so desperately need to more effectively operate and execute the Savior's challenge to love God and love our neighbor." So yeah, this idea of hardware and software, and then we apply that with agent network theory and human computation, right? Social computers, which is something I've been talking about more lately, like the complexity theory, and that like through wearables and extended reality, somehow us living our lives as extensions of a global brain sensor network, like become like integrated into a networked thinking system. You know, I don't know. To me, it's all sort of starting to come together, and I feel like this is all related to flow. So early on, and they mentioned it in the documentary, that WeWork had a residential program called We Live. It almost sounds like a horror film, right? And it was supposed to be, you know, they imagined painted all of these big, you know, pictures of it being so amazing and growth, but for the most part, actually, it didn't quite live up to its promises. And the communal aspect, I guess people had really small private living quarters, and then they were supposed to live like communally out in public. But I guess it worked that way for a while, and then less so over time. But they would bring investors through, and then they would tell everyone to come out and have a beer and sit and make it make the space look activated. And to me, it almost seems like those architectural drawings where, you know, they have these plazas or whatever with all these happy people in them, only when they actually get built, no one's there, and they're always empty and sad. So this was sort of this idea, and yeah, so they had the We Live and the We Grow were their expanded models off of the office space. And so I think that the smart city is an extension of the We Live program, that they're going to build it out in a bigger way. And now it's a different environment because we're into sort of pod life, like this idea of pods. So this was an article that talks about the Internet of Things. So the first thing I did after we watched the documentary again, I said, okay, let me just put in Internet of Things and WeWork and see what comes up. And this was the first thing that was talking about the technology, because I said, I think I remember back in the day that there was something about sensor technology being used in these co-working spaces. It talks about that they had a whole director of systems research, and they were using environmental sensors. Some of it was around environmental quality in the building. So this is like standards, like not necessarily tracking the people, but tracking the humidity and the air quality and the lighting. Now, we know that there's tremendous pressure lately after the whole like lockdown stuff, right, of smart building technology, because there's a certain set of people who are very terrified about air quality, right? And then all of the updates and the upgrades that happen for air quality, right? And so that all drove all of this property technology. They had beacons in the common spaces, and it says that they would triangulate the indoor position of the members, although the data was anonymized. And then it said it had an overhead sensor, 104, that used computer vision to observe occupancy. Now, again, this idea of ceiling-mounted artificial vision is very concerning to me, and it's something I've talked about in the context of like the Wildflower Montessori schools, and later this, I'm trying to remember, what do they call it, like dynamic lab or something, that was like a computable, like a functioning room computer space. But they describe this as the Internet of Place, using the Internet of Things and sensor technology to discern the sense of design, the success of architectural design. So it's always told, like, the story is always good. Like, we're not actually watching you because we're creepy. We're watching you because we want to make your experience better. We want to know that we're successful in our design program.
When they can
And
always
really,
give, like, there's always some sort of use case scenario that they can give where it does make sense. You know, like, I went, one of the presentations I went to at Smart Cities Week in Denver here was, they were talking about using LiDAR to understand the traffic flow so they can better adjust the lighting. And I'm like, okay, if that's it, that's all it is, you know, that's, I mean, it would be hard to argue against that, you know, like, yeah, you want your lights to run efficiently, but it's not just that, it's so much more.
Right. And so this next slide, it's talking about a partnership they had with something called Build Space and Buildings IoT. Now, they used a lot of glass. And so that's one of the things in the documentary. It shows like they actually had special relationships with fabricators, because they would go in and they would break down space. So like ultimately what you're paying for is space, right? And like the members anyway. And so some of the spaces were open and just like broad tables, but then some of them were private, like if you had to have a private meeting, are quiet. And so that was all glass cubicles. And so they bought so much glass that they actually had special relationships about like the containment mechanisms. Now, it's just occurring to me, but I think glass, there's a lot of upgrades to glass, like smart glass and nanotechnology glass and photonic glass, and eventually like glass is going to be like part of these interactive display systems. So it's interesting to me to think about like what if that's part of the relationship. But they're talking about like working on it says command and control from a single pane of glass, analytics enhanced by machine learning, and a building domain centric data management platform. And building controls being automated. So that's a tremendous amount. Like that's what they got their stash of data, the data analytics in the buildings. Like they had the biggest data set. That's what they were after. And then Build Space was talking about the use of QR codes in the space. The QR code activated applications that would collect data at the point of service, and that they were placed on individual assets in locations to provide, quote, a user-friendly way to share real-time process instructions and ensure energy efficiency, reduced administrative costs, et cetera, et cetera. So like, again, with lockdowns came the QR codes. I know that they were in other countries much earlier in India and China, but like the lockdown situation came with the QR codes. And then the other aspect of this is from the same website. It says Built Space and Buildings IoT team up to help WeWork reduce the risk of COVID in buildings, right? So in addition to concerns about air quality, which enabled the whole prop tech around like air quality monitoring, then you've got all of the cleaning protocols, right? That and like ionizing and washing and whatever this. So that gives you additional control over the space, right? Depending on what happens in the world, right? Like all of a sudden, like you can change the business model or change the behaviors in the space based on the perceived threat that's identified in the outdoor world. And then you use your technology to regulate and impose the rules, right? To make sure people are obeying the rules according to whatever is deemed the threat protocol, whatever the current threat protocol is in the space. All of that surveillance tech is part of that. And it was just talking about a test bed for a 13-person product research team, that the Times Square office was sort of the test bed for this. And when they launched it, the guy said, physical space is our product, says WeWork Chief Development Officer David Fano, who donned a T-shirt emblazoned with the words BLDGS buildings equals data for the roundtable. The mantra would be both the event's theme and a nod to the brain trust that WeWork inherited with its 2015 acquisition of the architectural and technology consultancy CASE, CASE. Now, I haven't been able to find out a lot about CASE, but it seems important. Like it seems like CASE were the point people that were doing all of the tech in the buildings. And this is just to, like, I don't know if you remember me reading this short story a while back. It's a really good one.
Yeah.
If people haven't read it, it's by Cory Doctorow. It's a novella called Radicalized, but one of the short stories, one of the novellas in this compilation is called Unauthorized Bread. And in that, it talks about the idea of using subsidized housing for low-income people with smart appliances to manage the experience of people in these buildings in very different ways. So if you were market rate paying, like you would have a luxury elite experience. But if you were a poor person there on an affordable housing voucher, then you were essentially a data commodity to be mined and surcharged through these invasive appliances in your home, including like the toaster that would only work with a certain kind of bread that was more expensive than all the other kinds of bread. And the most galling aspect of this was in the story that all of the affordable, I don't know why they were so high up, but because you would think higher up would be like have better views. But the apartments were like on the 30th floor, only they were never allowed to use the elevator if any market rate person was using it. Like they couldn't share the elevator. So essentially many of the people, like, and it was almost impossible to walk up 30 flights of stairs to your apartment. So like it was just an increasingly precarious way to live, and it was all governed by these automated Web3 processes. to create the caste system in the built environment. So this is going back to the IoT article. It's talking about they were, again, always saying that the products, the technologies were to improve their members' success, happiness, and well-being, and we want to prove it through evidence-based design. And that this idea of proving well-being or success in the evidence-based design goes back to healthcare design. And so I think that would be a key part of flow, would be to have happiness metrics, wellness metrics that are built into the built environment to track people. And that I can see that being used as some of the finance protocol for these multifamily units. And then it just, this section touches again on the computer vision, that they could have virtual turnstiles to map the traffic in the buildings, creating the Internet of Place. So I just want to take a minute and touch on his wife, Rebecca, because it's, Adam's, it was kind of the Adam show, but then it was also the couple show, and she was sort of presented as a little bit more over the top, intrusive, sort of problematic personality in the corporate space, who invited her into the game. Rebecca grew up on Long Island. I think she's cousin to Gwyneth Paltrow or whatever. Her father made a good bit of money in direct mail, which, if you're good at direct mail, it means you're good at data analytics. So I would think that that's his background. And she did a lot of sort of self journeying around, her own self-development and consciousness development. And she was seeking to become an actress, which is kind of appropriate, if we're talking about this as a spectacle. So this article, the title of it is How Billionaire Rebecca Neumann Put the Woo-Woo in WeWork. And so she was the one who was always the more kooky one. If they needed to pin something on, look at the kooky things we're doing, it would be, okay, she's the character that we place the kooky stuff on. The woo-woo. And this is just a bit from this article, but it's talking about the scene in the they would go to summer camps. There were these compulsory retreat outings for all of the WeWork employees. And I don't know if I can't imagine all the members would have to go, but, and they were sort of heavily lubricated with alcohol and various things. But there was also this, again, communal bonding, this idea, you're not just buying a workplace, you're buying a community. And in this, Rebecca, one of the scenes is she's standing up saying oh, we all have to hold hands and be together and share our energies. But the article is sort of pointing out that there's some of us are more equal than others aspect, because they're talking about everything being we, and yet the Neumanns had copyrighted we and then sold the use of the word we to the company to use for $5.9 million, which eventually there was pushback and they rescinded and gave them. But as she's saying this, we're all in it together, that she's on the stage with all of these assets, and then the regular employees were in the mud with trackable wristbands to make sure that their mandatory attendance was logged. Now, Rebecca became a yoga instructor at something called Omega Institute, and it's in upstate New York, I think Rhinebeck. And the interesting thing about Omega Institute is it actually is about Omega Point, Talhar Desjardins. So her woo-woo ethos is actually grounded in conceptually this idea of the world brain superorganism, noosphere program. And so all of that, it hadn't occurred to me at the time, but the we ethos is that convergence. And, we will be converged through our gig jobs or what have you. But to me, that felt very important, that her association with the Omega Institute. And the Institute itself was founded in the 70s. And it says it was conceived as a university of lifelong learning, and that they took its name from the writings of Pierre Talhar Desjardins, a 20th century Jesuit priest and evolutionary biologist who spoke of the Omega Point, the point of unity towards which all life is evolving, unity, balance, and wholeness within an individual and a culture at large. and so I think that this idea of we really is centered like behind the scenes in the world brain, right? It's we want you in the multifamily sensor-based housing environment, not just so that we can make a buck off of your wellness through a social impact bond and our real estate deals and what have you, but we're actually trying to create like an environment that will lead towards this convergent process. And then another thing, like, so his other co-founder, his name was Miguel McKelvey. And so you've got Adam Neumann, who is the guy with, who spent time as a young person in a kibbutz in Israel. But then his co-partner, Miguel McKelvey, actually grew up in, they call it a commune in Eugene, Oregon. I don't know if it was a straight up commune. They also describe it as like a gathering of single mothers and a lot of kids in Eugene. So I don't know if you'd call that exactly a commune. It was definitely a co-living shared environment. So the two of them both have this collective outlook. And in one of these articles, it says that Neumann actually says that he was seeking WeWork to be a capitalist kibbutz. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, because Ted Gertzel talks a lot about the singularity and the paradigm of the kibbutz. And then also that came out of this Emergent Man book, that we would live in an interplanetary kibbutz, and that would be our global interplanetary space thing. But not a socialist kibbutz. Like the origins of the like collective living in the kibbutz were originally more socialist leaning, but that this would be a capitalist one, because ultimately we need the markets to drive that. There is this imagining that the markets, quote unquote, free markets, will drive this evolutionary biology, that our built environment will shape us into the collective being that we're meant to become.
Yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that like Adam Neumann and Marc Andreessen don't plan on being a part of that kibbutz in terms of like an equal member. You know what I mean? I think that's an important thing to point out. The capitalist part of it. Yeah. Some of us are more equal than others, right? Like, yeah. I mean, most of these people have already bought their private island or their bunker or what have you. They're not in our ant colony. So again, this is just a slide that shows Miguel McKelvey, that he grew up in a collective of single mothers in Eugene with a, quote, gaggle of siblings. In this article, it says, WeWork had a great fall. Now an Oregon native is trying to put it all back together again. This is a quote from the article. It says, the all together now ethos at the commune would later inspire the dream that became WeWork. The independent seated in his unorthodox upbringing fueled his solo move to New York in his early 30s. And that's where he met. Well, his story is interesting too, in terms of how they frame him. They frame him as this kind of like shy, like back guy in the background, who's kind of like, he's kind of getting railroaded throughout the whole process. And, he doesn't really play like he's just like this guy in the background in terms of how he's presented.
He's like the one who's supposed to hold it all together. He's like the level one who's supposed to like pick up the pieces when.
Right.
Well, so he's moved on, and I can't remember the name of his new firm, but it does have something to do with like racial justice and equity and entrepreneurship and storytelling. So it's definitely like very much on sort of the woke impact side. That's where he has landed. And okay, so this is the much derided IPO, the We Company, and that was 2019. I don't know if this clip has the date, August 14th, 2019. So, and that was the beginning of the end. And then this was the much vaunted, like, oh my gosh, can you believe they put the woo-woo stuff in? Now, I don't actually find that woo-woo, but it has the logo, which is a circle, again, sort of omega pointish with we inside. And it says, we dedicate this to the energy of we, greater than any one of us, but inside each of us. Now, again, the greater than any one of us, that is this emergence, right? The complexity theory, that the independent parts like coming together make a whole that's greater. So supposedly that was Rebecca's addition. And For me, like, I'm just going back to thinking I did a read aloud of Yevgeny Zamyatin's book, We, and it feels like that's sort of actually what they're building. If people are curious, I think this book preceded 1984 in the Brave New World, like it was an influence on Huxley. Yevgeny Zamyatin was a Russian, and he talked about what it would be like to live in a world run by math, like applied math, where you have no privacy and you're just a number, and that you're all working for the collective well-being of the whole, right? And that the natural world in and of itself is outside, out beyond, in this terrifying chaos. And him sort of struggling with meeting someone in a resistance movement, and how that sort of planned out. So, if you think, it's funny that it didn't occur to me that the whole we part is just very much evocative of the we, the novel.
They wouldn't call it we.
Right? Okay, so this is a little bit like before we were talking about the spreading out, that it's not just going to be in the main top cities, but the mid-sized cities. And I think you're right, because I do, the research that I've done shows that there was definitely a focus on mid-sized American cities, because honestly, they're probably easier to smart up than the biggest cities. The biggest cities are complex and difficult with really murky politics. But if you can go into a mid-sized city that's aspirational, you can probably get a lot more done. And so this, to me, it's like the spores are ready to shoot out of Silicon Valley and spread this ethos of like Web3, connected, participatory economy into all the little nooks and crannies. And that's going to happen through the remote work paradigm and pricing people out of housing, normal housing, and then sending them off into the hinterlands.
This was becoming a very big issue. This became a very big issue, by the way, for us, because we were basically getting stuck in the geographic confines of Silicon Valley. Like our companies were like penned in, and it was becoming very hard for companies to grow in that area. And then basically, a horrible tragedy struck that turned out to also be in some ways a miracle in terms of, I think, the long run consequences, which is COVID, right? And none of us would have hoped that COVID would have happened. And it has been a horrible tragedy for many people, and I think, broadly for our society. But nevertheless, COVID was a system shock, right, that caused all big companies to basically instantly move online in a hard cutover, in kind of a way that I never imagined was possible. It was also an instant proof that companies really can run, at least for some time, they can actually run online, right? Basically, like no big company actually stopped operating as a consequence of this dramatic shift from in-person to online. And then all of a sudden, like that opened the door to, every CEO, every manager, every entrepreneur, every investor thinking, okay, the post-COVID world is not going to be like the pre-COVID world. The post-COVID world is going to be an opportunity to rethink and reinvent how companies are organized. It's going to be an opportunity to reinvent how industries are organized. It's going to be an opportunity to reinvent how geography works, right? What the role of cities is. It's going to be an opportunity to spread the economic activity from cities much more broadly, potentially throughout the country. Every employer, every company, every CEO here, is having some version of this conversation, with their own company. We talk about this with our founders all the time. And then there's a corresponding question that's opened up, which is how are people going to live? And some people are going to continue living the way that they were. And some people are going to undertake a radical change in how they live, and they'll go remote, and all of a sudden, you go remote and you have access to, thousands of jobs anytime you want, which is a totally new phenomenon. And then you now have the opportunity to rethink how families live, right? And so, is it necessary for ambitious kids to leave the place where they grew up in order to have access to first-class economic opportunity? In 2019, the answer to that was frequently yes. Today, maybe not. And I should also say, there's no, this is not a 0 or 100% thing. This is not like a hard cutover. It's not like the whole world goes remote or stays remote, right? Which is not what's happening. But there's this moment in time that we're in right now, which is like we can actually rethink and reinvent how companies are organized and how work happens, and then we can also reinvent how people live and give people a lot more options in how that happens. And so I think basically the presumptions that have underlied the whole structure of how the housing market works and how the industry works and how people live and work, I think it's basically all up for grabs. I think we have about a 5-year window, I think, as a society to kind of figure out what this means and how to adapt.
What's interesting, he says, we can think of new ways to do this or that. How many people are part of this conversation?
Right. Not many. We're going to reinvent it. We don't.
They're
rethinking.
They
don't know what they're reinventing.
Right. They're rethinking how we're going to live. We're not a part of that conversation.
Right. I mean, and that's part of like later on we'll talk about flow. Like they're talking about, oh, in the future, you know, everyone will be renters. But the reality is that most people, like their personal like wealth, unless you're a multi-billionaire class, is in your home equity, right? That the housing market has been a key aspect of how people build wealth. Now, there's problems in that. I'm not saying that's a perfect way to do it, but like all of my life, we've understood that that's how it's done, right? That's how you have stability. And at this point, it's just the Wild West, and that like most people, like how, you know, imagine people who bought a house in the last 5 years or something, like, and then somebody all of a sudden we say, oh, we're not doing that anymore. Like, that's not how the world, like, we're not going to create wealth in that way. We have some other new like behavior app tracking system on Web3 that's going to give you some equity scraps or something, like based on token points or what have you. Like, but they know where it's going. And that's why flow is there, is to guide that process. To like, I'm not saying it's going to come, like, to me, it's another stepping stone, right? You create WeWork, you get some data, you build on it, you collapse it, then you start again, and then you do flow. So it's like flow isn't the ultimate, like it's not going to be the end game. They're, you know, but they need to start at a neighborhood level or a building level, and then a neighborhood level before they can go just to full on smart mid-sized town, you know, whatever. Like they need these stepping stones, and so that's what Andreessen is investing in. And yeah, it's a new game, but no one's been told what the new game is.
When I have a lot of criticisms of like property regimes, but I do support the idea of people actually being able to own where they live in terms of, you know, from a rights standpoint or whatever. Yeah. Whereas once you become a renter or a subscriber, just thinking about power, that takes the little bit of power maybe you did have in terms of having some sort of ownership of a home, which again, like you said, has problems there too. But it's really shifting a lot of the power away from people back into these institutions and these systems. And
they're automated. Like the thing is, like, it's going to be automated, and it's going to have a smart lock on the door that might open or it might not open depending on what your status is, like for whatever metric is decided, you know? Yeah. So that's important. But they're like what he's saying is we were bottlenecked up in Silicon Valley. Now we've decided the new way of doing it is dispersed remote work model. So everything's up for grabs. And it's interesting though, he says within 5 years, like we have 5 years. So there's like a clock ticking somewhere. Like that's a pretty specific number, you know, 5, like that this stuff is going to happen. So it's interesting to think about what other events. Shock events are going to be coming to shift this in 5 years. So
Naomi Klein knows all about that shock doctrine. We should ask her.
Well, it's interesting because I went back because I remembered about the whole Tulsa remote work program. And I think I was even looking at that before the lockdowns. And so I sent this to Hege because I was like, what is the time frame of that remote work, right? And it was 2018. So that, again, this is like we couldn't even imagine that we would like lock down the whole world, but you know, it's kind of a miracle, you know, like, you know, just, they knew. And so like these programs of like, oh, like how many people like young out of college or, you know, no shade on Tulsa, but like, oh, I can't wait to move to Tulsa. Like, no, that doesn't happen. So they were piloting these programs early on. And it says that the program started in 2018, but actually, it says that the origin of Tulsa Remote dates to the late 1990s when the George Kaiser Family Foundation, located in the city of Tulsa, whose mission is to disrupt intergenerational cycle of poverty, and they started investing in initiatives to support local development. So again, Julianne knows a lot about the George Kaiser stuff. But I was a little bit surprised to actually find an article about the Tulsa Remote that was actually a paper assessing it, not only Tulsa, but also Tucson. And that was part of Brookings, the Brookings Institute, and it was a policy program. So like these programs aren't disconnected. They're part of a larger like national level or global level policy program that Brookings was a lead on. So I think it's important to understand that this, okay, the remote life, the remote worker, the instability, again, is all part of this emergence culture, in my opinion. Like, how do we move people around and then maximize the data and the intellectual capital and the, cognitive, that's what cognitive capitalism is about. And then, Tulsa is also, I've talked a couple of times today about Michael Bloomberg and Michael Nutter and the What Works cities and the open data, that Tulsa is a What Works city. And it talks about using data to build towards the sustainable boom. So again, Tulsa is an oil city, right? Oklahoma is an oil state, but somehow they're going to market their data as sustainability. And then all of this is backed up by Harvard, I think the Ash School, and Data Smart City Solutions. They're talking about the urban Internet of Things. And this was back in 2015. So this is saying, he's like, there's just not enough housing. Everybody wants to live in San Francisco, and there's just not enough housing. It's a problem.
The West developed, the story of the West is the story of cities and the creation of all these amazing cities. And then, over the last 50 years, that kind of trend has gone into hyperdrive, and you've had this emergence of what economists call superstar cities, where you've got these specific cities like Washington, D.C., New York City, Boston, San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, and then, internationally, London and Tokyo and Singapore and so forth, and Paris, that are kind of these cities that are like irresistible draws for people who are, highly ambitious and want to be around a lot of other highly ambitious, highly productive people. It turns out, as a result of that superstar city clustering thing, there's been a bifurcation in the housing market, right? Where basically those superstar cities, they become, basically occupied. At some point, people end up with a political agenda, and then they stop building housing, right? And so the places where people want to go and want their kids to go are very difficult to get to. And the San Francisco Bay Area is like a classic example of this. San Francisco last year authorized, I think, 6,000 new housing units, right? Which was just like an absurdly low number relative to the demand for people who want to move there. And then the places that do not have this kind of clustering agglomeration superstar city effect, they build plenty of housing, but there's not as much opportunity there. So heading into COVID, you saw this incredible bifurcation, and you saw it in the American economy, and you see it in American politics, where basically you're either in a city, you buy a home, you've kind of you've got that level of commitment, you've got that level of opportunity for you and your family, right? Or you're in a more rural environment and you're basically stuck and you don't have access to good jobs, and your kids are not going to have like high-tech jobs, and it's you're going to have a lower quality of life.
But you have reality privilege. Eventually, we'll all have we'll have the digital reality. Well, so, you caught the part where he's like, eventually cities are so successful that they stop building housing, right?
Yeah. Everybody wants to go there.
So we did a whole show on this, right? About Laura Arrillaga and the fact that there's an article in Fortune magazine. The Silicon Valley royalty that populates America's richest town is fighting tooth and nail to keep 58 new housing units from being built. VC billionaire Marc Andreessen and ultra wealthy neighbors thwart housing in California town. And this is Atherton, California. And it was multifamily housing, which is exactly the thing that Flo is talking about. They're like, but not me. And so I did also want to point out, there's another bigger image on here from Stanford. It's an obituary for John Arrillaga, who is Laura Arrillaga Andreessen's father. And essentially he made his fortunes in real estate in Silicon Valley. Largely commercial and are in research real estate, not residential real estate, but these people know real estate. They know how to make a buck on land and housing planning. And they also can sit up there and tell you a really nice story about the problems of not having enough housing when you're, in a particular, desirable location. But they're also the people who are very publicly throwing a fit when that housing might impact their property value. And
if you own, there are potentially big downsides, because you might be stuck in one place where maybe you don't want your family to be for the next 30 years, because maybe opportunity shifts around. But if you rent, you don't necessarily build up equity by default. With the way that most apartment offerings work. So there's big economic consequences. There's also big social consequences and political consequences, right? Which is and this is something that's kind of been deep in the American character for many decades. But this idea that if you basically basically, if you have a sense of commitment, if you have a sense that you are actually invested in the place where you live, you are more connected to the society, you're more connected to the culture, and then ultimately you're more connected to the politics, to the polity, to the political body. And so there's been long-running policies in the United States to encourage home ownership. Now, it turns out those can be overdone. They can end up with problems, and we saw a lot of the problems that kind of came out of that approach, and kind of the historical approach in the 2008 financial crisis. But nevertheless, there is like a very kind of big, deep, meaningful, kind of sense of identity that comes with housing.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're changing it up. And they talk about your identity being linked to your housing, which is kind of true, right? Like, you're like, oh, you meet somebody, you make small, oh, where do you live? And then it situates you in place, right? And it's interesting because they're like, oh, well, you might not want to like live somewhere for 30 years. Well, how many people actually pay off their mortgages? Not most, right? There's all sorts of, like, you buy a house with a whatever mortgage, but like you can sell it before, you're not tied to a certain place for 30 years. So like that feels like sort of a red herring there. Like, might be stuck there. Well, you're more likely going to be stuck because your mortgage goes underwater because the housing prices are manipulated than because, you're stuck in a long mortgage. So I just want to emphasize, like, they're changing the game. Like and they're changing the game, I think, not just to make the money, but they're changing the game because the new game involves data flows tied to these actor network theories. And it's going to be too hard to retrofit all the legacy housing into this. So they're going to need to start moving people, and it won't happen all at once. Like, even in our lifetimes, not everybody is going to be living in the inside outside in robot where they go to sleep, but they're going to slowly rebuild cities to fit this new paradigm. And I think a lot of the sort of incentives for new construction and disparagement of historic legacy housing is sort of built into that. They need to get to build these robot buildings, and to do that, like, no one's going to. I mean, honestly, they need it as a vertical. The technology, like, it's probably costs a lot more to put Internet of Things technology in individual houses, like freestanding houses, than it does to like outfit a big building with a lot of modules. Like, and they're always looking for that. Yeah. So this is talking just, again, there's a book called, an article, The Long View, Hudson Yards, Quayside, and the Return of the Company Town. And like, we've talked a lot about company towns in the past, and script currency and the control that gives. And I thought that was actually a really useful observation in this article. And it was actually, I think, a real estate publication, but talking about wanting to build campuses and including all the things: office space, apartments, hotels, a gym, a school, and retail. They really want to control everything. And then it says, since WeWork also offers services like insurance, payroll management, and social events, they could, in theory, get anything they need through the company. And I think that's really important to understand with Web3, is the integration of insurance and payroll into and your social life. And then it says, this is the one that you had mentioned before, WeWork also has vague plans to, quote, touch cities by offering government software to track the well-being of citizens. So like, I think that goes in with the BlackBerry guy, Balsillie, with saying like, oh, Sidewalk Labs is bad. Like they're infringing on the government. There's going to be some backdoor deal made with the governments to track, but don't worry, we just are tracking your well-being. And to start out, I think this is sort of the last section. They're not going to sell you something dark right away. They want to make it jazzy and fancy. So Brandy brought this to my attention. Babcock Ranch is in southern Florida near Fort Myers. They're framing it as smarter than the average town. So these are single family homes with all the IoT, Wi-Fi, electronic trolley shuttles, Nest things. They describe it as a city that is built on technology. It very, very forward in their promotion of solar, which will be part of like the climate and the flow carbon aspect of linking human well-being to the solar energy, drone deliveries and robotic garbage cans. This is all on this page that they're pitching. And, in this image, you see lit life powered by the sun, acres and acres of these solar panels, which honestly, it just is gut wrenching to me to imagine. Like, to me, that just looks like ecosystem destruction, honestly. that just covering like acres and acres and acres. And this was a partnership with Florida Power and Light. So it was a public-private partnership. And then underneath the solar panels, it has some children and it says a new kind of social network, which again speaks to the Adam Neumann clip that you had.
Yeah.
And evidently, like, you need a good story. So Brandy pointed out that like the story that was told on 60 Minutes was that the recent hurricane just skipped over Babcock Ranch, like no damage because they're super sustainable, right? They have sustainable buildings. So like none of their solar panels were damaged in the hurricane because they're so sustainable, which just to me feels like BS. And then they talk about like the hometown of the future, America's first solar city, and innovation and success. So I think when they move to the smart, they'll be selling the Babcock Ranch framing of this.
Solar City is the name of Elon Musk's company, that one of the companies Elon Musk was invested in.
What is it called?
Solar City.
Solar City.
Yeah.
So here they're talking about the school, that's in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So this has an image of a little. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just noticing the steam. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So STEAM. It says full steam ahead. STEAM is science, technology, engineering, math, and then they throw art, the A, in the middle of it because we need the creative economy to build the metaverse. And it has a little girl, and she's with one of those sort of plastic rimmed iPad things, and there's a desktop programmable robot in front of her. And it says that the sustainability and conservation principles of our ranch provide opportunities for hands-on project-based learning about nature, health, and renewable energy with a STEAM focus. Students to demonstrate mastery of many subjects. So again, this is badges, this is competency-based education, and it's alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. And then later on, it talks about children blooming, and they have child care for ages 6 weeks to 12 years old. So again, wrap around. We've got it all covered. Like, don't worry about like, we've got full service. We'll take care of your kids all day. And then it talks about, it has a pool and a clubhouse, a healthy start in life. And it's all about wellness activities and physicality. And then it has a raised garden beds, nurture a connection with nature. Once you get past the solar panel fields, you can have a connection with nature. And then this is a clip I kind of put together. I mashed together two clips where they're talking about the smart home infrastructure in this Babcock Ranch and how they set up the public-private partnership with Florida Light and Power.
Welcome back to Innovation Way, as Babcock Ranch and our partners forge ahead with what could be an industry-changing experiment. New homes far beyond the cutting edge, never before implemented building practices and smart technologies, a real-world testing environment to determine if innovative homes are not only healthier to live in, but also reduce the cost of home ownership. And when it comes to that testing, there's no one better qualified or equipped than Florida Power and Light.
Since the initial Solar Energy Center was put in place, Florida Power and Light has been honored to watch Babcock Ranch grow and thrive. So when the idea to create Innovation Way was presented, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to carry our long-standing partnership with Babcock Ranch into the future. First and foremost, we will objectively oversee the testing and monitoring of all systems, innovations, and technologies implemented in each of the test homes. To do this effectively, we will first program everything to simulate the scenarios of families actually living in the homes. And second, we will contribute some innovations of our own. The batteries for Innovation Way will be charged by the grid and can power a home for close to 24 hours. Additionally,
they control your power.
Home will feature a smart panel that will let you decide which parts of your home you want to power during an outage, like the appliances, home internet, ceiling fan, and lighting. App-enabled smart panels will control each home, meaning you can remotely operate home circuits and monitor usage. During an outage, this functionality will assist in maximizing the battery life. Along with everyone else involved, we look forward to helping develop new best practices for years to come and helping people live healthier, more sustainable lives.
Our company's assembled incredible teams of architects, engineers, and product designers, and then collaborated with national manufacturers to create a series of products that are currently not available in the marketplace, starting with the most intelligent and efficient heating and cooling systems that we've ever built.
In each of our homes, we're putting a strong focus on clean air, clean water, and clean services. and a wide range of smart home technology will be noticeable throughout. This includes wireless access points to eliminate any Wi-Fi dead spots, antimicrobial counters, foam attic insulation, enhanced air filtration systems, and even electric vehicle charging stations.
The homes will also feature Moen leak detection systems, which can automatically be shut off when a leak is present. And the environmentally friendly water systems don't require any electricity or salt.
Speaking of water, when you want it hot, it'll come on demand thanks to recirculating tankless water heaters with motion and voice-activated faucets. And for your shower, Alexa will happily turn it on to whatever temperature you like.
Full home smart lighting systems will also be activated by voice or even by app. This means you can activate lights when you're not home or turn them off if you've forgotten. And in pantries and closets, lights will be motion activated.
Security systems will include video doorbells, cameras throughout the homes, and sensors for all windows and doors, including motion and glass break sensors. And from your phone, the sky's the limit. Wi-Fi enabled garage doors, thermostats, and door locks.
This is just a glimpse of what our companies will present and put to the test on Innovation Way. We can't wait to see the results.
It's hard to tell who's more excited. Our billers for bringing their innovations to life, or Babcock Ranch for having them as partners for this one-of-a-kind experiment.
Yeah, it's that
You're
whole.
gonna make it sound great, luxury, deluxe. Wouldn't
Yeah.
you pay for like having all that control on your phone?
But you don't really have. I mean, it's like you're actually giving up control. That's the irony of the whole situation. It's like, yeah, we'll let you play with the controls, but we ultimately have the controls. And they even had that. Like the people were complaining about the Nests, the thermostats, like being adjusted remotely, and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, why is my house so cold?" They're like, "Well, we had to balance out the system, like we had to, it's the energy grid." So yeah, I just does not sound appealing to me.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, like, I think if you led with pod life or micro studio apartment life, like, it wouldn't be attractive. Like, if you said, "Oh, by the way, like, we've decided it's mega city regions and pod life to maximize the ant colony for cognitive capitalism," like nobody would buy in. So they're, they develop stories. It's kind of like the Truman Show or whatever. Like they'll develop a narrative arc that makes it palatable while they're building it out. And so this image I have, like one is I've had this image in mind for a while. It's from the Augmented Democracy website, which was the Cesar Hidalgo promoting sort of DAO democracy. And it's a young guy who is in a cubby kind of single twin bed with a projection on the wall and, I don't know, a little shelf with some bottles or something on it. And a human-sized robot is unloading his groceries into a refrigerator. But it's definitely a small studio apartment with like one tiny sofa and a various sort of LED things being projected, like you have your own personal robot there. But it's definitely one of these micro apartments. And then above I have one of these Japanese cube. I don't even know where I put in like pod life, and this came up and I'm like, this is terrible. Like it looks like a porta-john on its side. And it's like a pod with a lot of technology built in. Essentially it's like a plastic controlled sleeping bed. And this is, I think, from like Japan, like the sort of Tokyo hotel pod thing, so that like you could be secure while you're sleeping. But, later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I feel like a lot of this is actually conditioning us, and I don't know how realistic it is, but I think that there's still these presumptions that somehow we're going to space, or if we don't actually go to space, we're going to live like we're in outer space, or they're going to put us out in the desert and pretend like we're in outer space or something, and that this pod co-living life, which really started in the biosphere, Biosphere 2, when I went there in Arizona, like that they were using that to sort of see if people could manage in enclosed systems, enclosed ecosystems, and it did not work well. It didn't work well for the plants or anything in there. The people all fell apart. It was like pretty awful.
But they didn't have, access to the metaverse where they could escape.
Right. Well, so in that, I don't know that I'm going to necessarily play this because we played it before, but this is Marc Andreessen in another talk where he's talking about reality privilege. This idea that, if you actually want to experience the real world, you're selfish and greedy, because actually it's only in the metaverse that we'll have equitable access to all opportunities. The other individual who was part of that interview was Reid Hoffman. Now, Reid Hoffman is involved in OpenAI, which is connected to the chatbot. And he's definitely this is from his LinkedIn page. It says a human-centric path to artificial general intelligence, our investment in Adept. So he's with Greylock Partners and really working on building out the Singularity, which I think is sort of the backstory. The front story of the Inside Out robot is, profiting on new models of real estate that are subscription-based and data collection-based and connected to smart impact bonds. But then the backstory is the data is feeding into a sentience, like sentience machine. And that, Andreessen and Reid Hoffman are all sort of part of that crew that are working on that. Hoffman, actually, he helped establish the Berggruen Institute's initiative called Transformations of the Human. And this guy, Tobias Rees, he made this introduction, Reid Hoffman did in 2016 to Nicholas Berggruen to set up this idea that we would be transformed of what it means to be human. The program was designed as a test bed for assembling new ideas to track the ways in which contemporary technology, such as artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, are disrupting post-Cartesian notions of the human. So I think our environment is meant to change us in the ways that we are human as well. Ben Goertzel is featured in this clip. He actually got his PhD in applied mathematics from Temple University here in Philadelphia. His dad was a professor of sociology at Rutgers. He specifically was looking at cybernetic socialism and conspiracy theory. That was Ted, his father Ted, that was his focus. So I would say it's tempting to make this all out as capitalism, but I think that there is a history going back to Chile and Cybersyn of a cybernetic socialist leaning as well. And so if we can get into maybe we can just separate out the economic construct and understand better the Web3 tokenization and the cybernetic steering aspect, that would be better. So he has, in this slide, there's an image. One of them is a slide share from 2015 by Ted Goertzel called Cybernetic Socialism and the Technological Singularity. And then next to it, I have a little picture of Ben, his son, in his leopard skin fake fur hat, holding up the sort of the singularity motif in front of Sophia, the humanoid robot that he's working with Hanson Robotics. The guy Hanson, he works on the animatronics, and Ben Goertzel does the AI mind. And then eventually Ben and Ted get together and they edit a book called Life on the Brink of the Singularity. And so it's like a 700-page book, but I have it as a PDF on my blog. And among this is not anything to sneeze at. These are serious thinkers beyond. So includes Robin Hanson, the guy behind Futarchy, and then also Francis Heiligen, who is a major player in that space. So let me just go back, and this is a conversation that Ben is having with Charles Hoskinson of Cardano, where they're talking about how they will use machine learning, and this is going to be impact tokenization to train the AI, and some of this stuff is going on behind the scenes, I think, in coordination with Ocean Protocol and Trent McConaughey.
There's a couple interesting projects that I've founded related to AGI. SingularityNet, which is a decentralized blockchain-based AI platform, is one of them, and OpenCog, which is a straightforward attempt to build an AGI, is another one of them. And actually, the interpenetration and the sort of fusing of the OpenCog AGI system and design and the SingularityNet decentralized AI platform, I think we can bring those two together in a very productive way via porting SingularityNet onto the Cardano platform that you and your colleagues have created. And this is something that I think can have a quite profound effect in terms of accelerating progress toward AGI. So it's not really a cognitive architecture or an AI system. SingularityNet is a decentralized platform that allows a lot of different AIs created by different people doing a lot of different things to all collaborate and cooperate together to solve.
So
to
it's
solve
like a
problems.
fertile environment for them to live within.
Yeah, I mean it's a multi-agent system, which is sort of tuned for the AI agents and the multi-agent for the Singularity Net is a multi-agent system which is tuned to work well for agents that are doing AI of various sorts, right? So you can, in the very simple sense, Singularity Net is just a protocol for different AIs to communicate and cooperate with each other, right? So two AIs in the network, they can exchange identities, they can pay each other, they can ask each other for things, and they can respond to those requests. They can swap data, or they can reference data sets. They can decide to cooperate in a certain way. So Singularity Net is a communication protocol between multiple agents that may live anywhere on the internet, and they may be owned by anyone. They may be open or closed, but it's designed specifically to allow AI agents to communicate and cooperate in various ways. And we have a Singularity Net AI marketplace now, which has a bunch of different AIs providing various services, some of which are pretty nitty-gritty, like there's a song splitter app with a back-end service that takes music and splits it into multiple stems or tracks. There's face recognition AIs. There's some things that are more abstract, like AI agents that recognize patterns in graphs. These different AIs, they live in the Singularity Net decentralized platform, and people can get those services by paying in a cryptographic token or paying using fiat currency, which is then converted on the back end to a cryptographic token. But that sort of scratches the surface, right? Because where it gets really interesting is you don't just want to have a marketplace where people are paying for services and the AIs are providing them. I mean that's good. It's good to have that decentralized and not owned by a big tech company. But where things get really interesting is when the AIs on the platform are providing services to one another, right? Or are cooperating together, like, well, I can't do this on my own, but if we work together, I can do this. Maybe I outsource some work to you, you outsource some work to me, and then cooperatively we can fulfill this. So you have assemblages of AIs that are dynamically cobbling themselves together.
So you give a goal to the system or an objective, and then it has to figure out how is it going to work within that environment, including working with other agents that it has no knowledge of other than its capabilities.
Right, and that figuring out is done by agents in the network, right? So right now the agents running in the network are really kind of simple, and most of them are solving problems on their own that are posed to them by users or customers, although there's some cases where you have an AI agent that then outsources some work to another AI agent. But the objective is to get more swarm intelligence happening, right? Where the intelligence is in the combination of multiple agents. The current blockchain infrastructure underlying Singularity Net, which is based on the Ethereum blockchain and the Solidity scripting language, I mean, this has been great in that it let us get where we are now and build an actual blockchain-based decentralized AI network and marketplace. On the other hand, various limitations in the Ethereum blockchain they're going to hold us back from getting to the next step that we need to get to with Singularity Net and really creating a Singularity Net that's capable of this sort of self-organizing emergent swarm AI, which is really part of our original mandate.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea that the AIs have a marketplace amongst themselves too, thinking about it flips the whole idea of what people think of as a market on its head. You know, how does that even work? So that you issue a certain amount of tokens initially to the AI to do its job, and then it has to negotiate with the other AIs to do whatever it's going to do, and how does that affect the pricing of these things? There's so many questions I have about that whole system, and just the manipulation. I mean, I think about how the housing market and how it's so perverted by these big players, you know, these institutional investors. But how does that? I don't know. I have a lot of questions about that whole thing.
Oh gosh, you know what? I thought I was almost done, but I still have a little bit more. Do you mind if I keep going?
Let's just roll with it.
Well, so this is the chapter in Ted Goertzel's book that he wrote with Ben, Life on the Brink of the Singularity. and it's called, so it's chapter 19, Capitalism, Socialism, and Singularitarianism. The singularity with an ism on the end. Okay. And the end of the beginning is the name of the book. And then, so Capitalism, Socialism, and Singularitarianism by Ted Goertzel. And here is where the kibbutz stuff comes in. So this is I guess it's sort of just almost like an interview with Ted, and he's talking about the kibbutz movement. And I'm just going to read this section because I think it's actually really interesting to think about. Again, use the lens of the ant computer, the ant colony, use the lens of the outside-in robot, use the lens of this idea of cooperation and competition, and use sociality, this idea of like collective raising of the young. Ted, in the early days of the kibbutz movement in Israel, there was an attempt to recreate something similar to the African communities you describe. Rui, people were together constantly. Children slept in children's houses rather than in the privacy of their parents' homes. Meals were eaten in communal dining halls. None of this involved electronics. It was accomplished by having people physically together all the time. Some people were bothered by the lack of privacy, but this was considered to be a bourgeois indulgence. One of the early leaders said, "There must be no privacy. All privacy interferes with our communal life." And then it says, with time, people grew tired of all the togetherness, and then they gradually got more privacy, and so on. And then the children could live with their parents. But I think that this is really important to think about. Okay, so this is like, privacy, schmivacy, right? Like this is all about like a communal life pattern. And from this reminds me a lot, like eventually I hope to get around to doing a read aloud of Walden 2 by B.F. Skinner. But in this idea, it's like a techno-utopia. And in that, all of the children are raised separately from their parents and to some optimization, like their inherent optimization, and they're raised by people who are like good at it. And actually in some ways that's a little similar to The Giver, although it's like the babies are cared for by the caregivers, not the actual birth parents. So I feel like the behaviorism of Walden 2 and the technology is very much evocative of this. And so I put this in. This is a clip from Seinfeld about like the culture of being together and sort of being enforced communal relations that you don't want to be in. So this is just a story.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Joan.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Just pretty good, not great.
Okay, great.
Are you happy?
Oh, I'm delighted.
Okay, have a nice day.
You too.
Hi, Jerry.
Hey. Ah, well, thank you very much.
For what?
For putting my picture up on that wall. I'm like Richard Dawson down there now. And every person I see engages me in this long, boring, tedious conversation. I can't even get out of the building.
You should be thanking me for liberating you from your world of loneliness and isolation. Now you're part of a family.
Family?
Yeah.
You think I want another family? My father's demanding my uncle pay interest on $50 he was supposed to give my mother in 1941, and my uncle put my nana in a home to try and shut her up. And I'll tell you another thing, Cosmo Kramer, whatever you want to be called, the kissing thing is over. There's no more kissing, and I don't care what the consequences are.
So enforced sociability. I think that they put everybody's names and photos in the hall so that you had to be social to people.
Oh, I see.
Mailboxes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adam Newman's got it figured out. He must have watched this episode.
Yeah, exactly. They might have like, is there a kiss? You know, do you get like love what you do, love where you live, right? You have to like everything. So. Okay, so then this is back to Ted Goertzel's piece. The Israeli kibbutzim are the most extensive experiment with voluntary secular communal socialism. Many of the kibbutzim were organized on the principle of from each according to their ability, each according to his need. After the Israeli economic crisis of 1985, however, they began a process they called privatization under which many kibbutz enterprises have been reorganized and function according to market principles. So there you've got Adam Neumann's capitalist kibbutz, right?
The only thing
Like,
worse than living in a kibbutz is living in a privatized kibbutz.
Right, exactly. On some kibbutzim, members still contribute their salaries to a common fund and receive a standard allowance. So from each according to his ability to each according to his need continues to be a lifestyle choice, but differential pay scales are used in the factories, and those employees who do not choose to join keep their differential wages. So so it's shifted. So you can see sort of, I'm sure he was there during the latter day privatized version. So this is about the borrowing, the stuff with the neighbor, but I think it's very significant that it's SALT that he takes.
Under the age of 40, 50, first time they ever got to know their neighbors, right? They never had to, and their proxy for community probably was the workplace. And like you said, we're never going back to that. Whatever our new normal is, it's not the old.
I'm just going to give you a thought about that. It's an American thing that they never had to, right? In other countries, where I grew up in Israel, there's no such thing. You don't know your neighbors. When you don't have salt, you go to your neighbor's door, you knock on the door, they don't answer. You open the door, it's locked. You know where the key. You open it up, you go and you take the salt, you never bring it back. Yeah. Then they go back, there's no salt. Oh, Adam took it. And it's this community.
Here we call the police.
Yeah. They come in 4 hours.
It's true. Or San Francisco, maybe never.
Yeah.
You guys said, they said that, I didn't say anything.
Okay.
But the point is that it's such a natural thing for people living together to connect. And yet we live in a world where even when people are in the same building, they don't talk to each other in the elevator. Right. When I came to the United States and used to say hello to everyone in the elevator, people thought I was weird. Yeah. And I thought it was weird that you wouldn't say hello. Wouldn't you want to know who's living there?
Yeah, there's a scene in this Apple series where he meets a guy in the elevator and he's like, "Oh, I live in the building, come by, and he's like, "Well, I don't know you." He's like, "Well, come by and have a drink." And the other guy was like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Like, there's a whole scene that alludes to this whole mentality.
Yeah. Well, and then I just have a slide here about youth sociality and E.O. Wilson. We've talked about this, about the ant colony, that multi-generational communities that practice divisions of labor and behave altruistically, right? And I feel like that feels like flow is the brand promise is going to be something along the lines of youth sociality. And then I was just, when I was listening to that, I was thinking, like, he said salt, and that sort of surprised me because I was like, salt? Like, really salt? Like usually the story is like, can I borrow a cup of sugar or eggs or something? Like, you don't really go take somebody's like salt. I don't know. Like, there's not a recipe that definitely demand like it's not that common that to say
Yeah,
like
usually
salt
they'll
was
say butter or sugar milk, butter or sugar would be probably the most common.
Yeah, but and you take all of it. Like, you take all of it. You go and you take
and you don't
all
return
of your
it.
neighbor's salt. And you don't give it back. And I was like,
you don't return it.
And then he's like kind of jokey about it, like, "Oh, that Adam, he took all the salt." And I thought, what is it with salt? Like, I was really kind of curious about, like, it felt like a significant thing. And so, like, actually, I asked Steffers, I'm like, "Do you know anything about salt? Like, can you, like, it kind of felt like an odd, like, thing. Like, listen to this clip. Tell me what you think." And so I had come up with something that it was like one of the 3 alchemical signals, but she's like, I think it actually is more having to do with like electrical circuitry and currency and money. The idea of salt, like that you would use salt as an early currency, and that the term salary actually comes from salt. It says that the word salary stems from the Latin word salarium, meaning salt money. The Romans paid soldiers, officers, and civil administrators in an allowance of salt, and a salarium came to be a term for a military pay after salt was no longer used to pay the soldiers. And then there's they talk about Marco Polo, in China, that there was a certain way of preparing the salt and then creating a stamp on it, that it was like official salt that you would use for an exchange, a medium of exchange. And then I have a clip here. I'm not going to play it. It's just a screenshot, but showing it's about salt solutions and electrical conductivity. And then the more I think about this bioelectricity and coordination mechanisms, like it feels, I know it might be a bit of a stretch, but it's interesting to kind of think of that in the context of this flow, energy, climate, metabolism, smart environments. And then I went up and then I found this article, which was even quite like a little bit more esoteric, But, Deep Tea always tells me, and I don't know if she's told you, but she's like, keep a bowl of salt under your bed. It's protection. Like, keep a bowl of salt. And we talk about that. She's like, do you have your salt? And I guess in India it gets so humid that it turns into like, it waters up and then you have to replace it. But mine hasn't. But they talk about salt being part of like magical ritual and representing the earth, spiritual purity, and the transmutation of consciousness. And then it also represents the body, female, and the earth. It is the mother or the feminine energy principle, the ultimate exaltation of matter through the union of opposites, a philosopher's stone representing transcendence of ultimate knowledge. And because it can crystallize, and again, crystals, like crystallography, are so central in all of this, in its purest form, it was held to be a fluid living substance in the higher realms that crystallized when it descended into our minds. And so thus it symbolizes consciousness, thoughts, feelings, materialism, and it will be elevated through the process of dissolution and recrystallization. So this idea of different states of like becoming diluted and then recrystallizing is like a transformationary process. It says it's identified with the Ouroboros, the self-devouring serpent or dragon, and that Jung associated salt with lunar symbolism and the unconscious. And so, like, to me, like, looking at that, like, understanding that these people are about consciousness, like, understanding the importance of crystallography, like, understanding this idea of transmutation, right, that we are going to, like, flow into some other omega point state, the dissolution and the recrystallization. Again, they keep saying, like, housing, all that, we blew that up. We're not doing that anymore. We're doing something totally new. And this idea of the soul, because later on, Adam and his wife, we grow, the education program that they did, that got set aside, but they actually have a new one, and it's called Soulful. They've literally got their new lifelong learning program has got soul in it. And I'm like, okay, consciousness, the earth, the mother, the feminine, consciousness, the soul, and the moon. And you're going to go to your neighbor and you're going to take all their salt when they're not home. And then you're going to take it and you're not going to give it back. That's interesting. Like, I mean, just like because that was an odd scenario. Like, no one ever says I'm going to take my neighbor's stuff when they're not home and not tell them and then and take it all. Like, not take a little salt, take it all, and then take it to your house and then just like, oh, Adam, like whatever. So I'm just like, I don't know. Like, this has got a lot going on.
Well, you even look at like the business practices of them. Like, I mean, it's like these people don't even mean what they're saying. It's like, again, like.
But sometimes I do think that there is an intention set. Like, they're very clever about their wording. Like, they kind of even make a point about that in the thing about him trying to read from the script. Like, I don't know. It's an odd thing. Like, and it maybe if there are people out there watching this in Israel, like what you ask for is not a cup of sugar or some eggs or butter or milk, but you ask for salt, like, let me know. But I do think that this connection between the soul, here is a section from Jung, the overlapping signification of salt and obscurity begins to clear up. We are informed further that one of the principal meanings is soul. As the white substance, it is the, quote, white woman and the salt of our magnesia, the spark of anima mundi, and then it says Paracelsus equated salt with the soul, the stable basis of life, its earth, ground, and body. So again, like what they're trying to do is use our materiality to boost us into the cloud, like boost us into the avatar. And again, the feminine and the lunar, and which just sort of makes me think a little bit about like the lunar punk and this idea of solar punk and the lunar being more like, oh, we're not doing the normal domination. We're not trying to fit into the existing paradigm. We're going totally dark. We're going to privacy protecting, decentralized, distributed, libertarian anarchist programs, right? Like, and sort of witchy and esoteric. And that's sort of the ethos of the lunar punk aspect. So,
well, going back here, there was like this other slide back here, right here, evaporation, none, or Lot's. And then I was thinking about Lot's. Wasn't it Lot's wife that was...
Lot's wife turns to salt.
Turned into salt. I don't know if there's a relation there, but like I was just trying to think of all the salt references.
I know.
Because there's a biblical
there's a lot.
reference
like,
to salt.
Again, to separate it, because it's like these two guys up there saying, I'm taking all your salt, all your feminine, all your groundedness, and I'm putting you in the metaverse, right? Like reality privilege, salt for you. And so this is just going back. This is Ted Goertzel's thing. He's talking about the failure of the kibbutzim to sustain socialist purity has been disappointing. But guess what? Like, many enterprises are really sophisticated and they use a lot of modern technology, and that's a great career for young people. So like, yeah, we got privatized, but now we've got tech involved. And literally the line, it says, as highly innovative and flexible voluntary communities, which seems like flow, they are well suited to becoming part of what technological visionaries call the global brain.
What
like,
book
this
is that
isn't
from?
Ben and Ted.
That's from their
this
article?
Is Ted and Ben Goertzel's book. Ted Goertzel's
Essays.
chapter in Ted and Ben Goertzel's book about the singularity. They're literally talking about
They
the
even
kibbutz
use the
being the
term.
basis of the social brain, of the global brain.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, right? So here's the water cooler moments. They're saying he hates the water cooler moment. Oh, and he's talking about screen time, concerns about screen time. And what I'm going to say is, like, it's not going to be on screens, and they know it's not going to be on screens. Oh, wait a minute.
Well, and there's that organization too, and I think we've talked about that. Something to do with protecting children from screens. They put out a lot of stuff. They have a YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
channel
Well, I went out there on Long Island. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, God, I hated the water cooler moments. Like, I mean, like, to have to stand there and like talk about the football game. Like, I can't.
I'm gonna have to push back on my partners a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Good cop, bad cop.
Please go ahead.
For an investing firm, I accept, and I already said you guys are not just investors. You're partners and businessmen and entrepreneur, and it's factual. I strongly feel, and Mark asked you what's important about this conference, and he said it's important to think a little bit how the future is going to look. The serendipitous connections, so the water cooler is boring. They're interesting. When you're building a company, and it's getting exciting, and a new idea is coming, and the whole team was supposed to go home, and it's 8 p.m., and everybody told their husbands, their wives, and their kids we're being there in 30 minutes. And then someone went to the bathroom, sorry for the example, and comes back and is like, I have it. And they say this thing that solves the entire problem. And everybody gets so excited, and before you know it, it's 2 a.m. And we just moved the business forward, not by a week, but by a year. That special piece cannot happen on Zoom. I think human potential is in the cloud, I believe it, but human interaction is happening right here. And I actually think if you look 10 years forward, the companies that are going to make the effort now to be face-to-face, now we can describe what face-to-face is, there are many ways to do it, but the companies that are actually going to do the face-to-face, I think when we look back 5 years, maybe even 10, are going to be the winners. With my team, we're fighting for that face-to-face time, and every time we're together, the excuse of having this event brought a few of us together, and 3 things came up about the business as we were thinking about just what we're going to talk about. Now take that, because we agree that the office is a challenge, bring that back into your home. You're back in that multifamily building. Why not have those connections there? Why shouldn't you meet your, and it makes a lot more sense for me, by the way, that I'll meet my wife or my husband in the apartment building when I went downstairs to the pool than I do in the office. So both of those things work really well. And from a business point of view, I can do business there also. And then maybe there should be a co-working space. There should be an office, and maybe enterprises are going to look. So if enterprises need to do culture, and if culture is not going to be in the office anymore, then maybe there's a new hybrid that has to do with the home put together with an office space. Then I'll give one more thought that I have. I think the fact that you guys have 7 offices is the future. So I do think it's smaller offices and centers, but it's going to be very hard for me to be convinced that not bringing people together and not having human connection is in our nature. I don't think we're built to look at the screen. And I think that one day when we're all much, much older and we're sick and we're on our deathbed and we're looking at ourselves and we have that moment of realization and we say, well, how much time in my life did I spend with my loved ones and with people I really care about? And how much time of my life did I spend in front of a screen? If that answer of in front of a screen is too big, I am not sure how we're going to feel that second before it's all over.
I'll just say the water cooler at We seems to have been a keg of beer.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the idea of like, oh, just you're going to work from home, you're going to live, and like, yeah, this whole construct of just.
And they're going to remake culture, right? I mean, they said that pretty much. Like, we're going to reinvent culture, and we're going to kind of have control of everything.
Yeah.
Like, you never get to not be at work because your work is your house, right? And you never get to not be at school because your school is your house. And so I want to point out, like, but this is very, like, because you can see most people after, 2 years of Zoom were like, yeah, Adam, you're right. We hate the screens. Like, yeah, like, and they're going to like bond with that concept. But the thing is, you can't tell me that like Andreessen and Neumann don't realize that the future is bio-nano, right? The future isn't a screen. The future is like integrated into all of the smart materials. Like, here's an image that I have that I haven't used in a while, but it's from Ian Achildes, who's at Georgia Tech, the Internet of Nano Things, from the IEEE Wireless magazine in 2010, Jason. Wow. 2010.
Yeah.
And like it has a young guy and he has bio-nano things in his brain, like little green dots in his brain. And he's thinking, and there's a nano phone and all the walls are dots and it has voice control and molecular communication. And it is called pervasive nano things. And this conference was in Lisbon. So molecular communication, electrical magnetic communication. There's all of this signaling going on. They know it's not going to be screens. I mean, like, yeah, maybe for the next 5+ years, it'll be screens, but then it won't be screens. It will be this, and we'll be trapped in their smart houses.
It's interesting on the screen thing. I mean, there are obviously problems that are created by that, and people are going to want to get out of that. And then they'll be like, oh, they'll be so grateful to get their kids off the screen.
Right.
This morning,
but then you'll have surveillance in your brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've got nanobots in your brain.
Exactly. Well, this morning I was going to tell you I had to go get an eye exam because the DMV now in Colorado requires that you have to have a professional, like an optometrist. You used to just go to the DMV and they would just do a quick eye exam and you'd be good. Now you actually have to go to an optometrist to see one. So I was so pissed off that I had to go down there and pay money I don't have to do it. But I was talking to the lady about that, and I asked her about the eyes. I'm like, I'm like, you're probably haven't been around long enough to know this, but I'm curious with the computer screens and everything and how that's affected people's eyesights. She says, well, I don't know how it is for like a long time, but she did say like since 2020, the COVID thing, like I guess kids, like there's been a massive increase of children that are now nearsighted because of the computer, spending so much time on the computer.
Wow.
But again, they'll give you the solution. They'll be like, oh, don't worry, we're gonna get you off the screens now.
Yeah. Joe won't hurt a bit. Just have a few nanobots in your brain. Yeah. Well, so this is a continuation of Ted's chapter from the Singularity book, the end of the beginning, and this is right after he says like, hey, the kibbutz, the privatized kibbutz are great because we do tech and that will help the global brain. Then the next section is called the global brain and the withering away of the state. The promise of the withering away of the state was one of the most intriguing promises of the Marxian utopia, but it was inconsistent with the principle that the state would regulate general production. Today, the goal of minimizing the state is advocated by libertarians who favor market economics. But leaving economic and social decisions to the market alone does not incorporate social and environmental values. To incorporate social and values in a libertarian system, Victoris Vitas and David Weinbaum in this volume advocate replacing the hierarchical state with a fluid social order facilitated by distributed social governance. In this view, society will be regulated by voluntary negotiated arrangements, very much in the anarchist tradition, with disputes settled through arbitration. With future advances in artificial intelligence, these networks will not be limited to humans, but may include intelligent computers or robots with diverse degrees of autonomy. Now that's pretty terrifying. I don't think that most anarchists really think that they're doing smart contract DAOs with AI as part of their distributed system. But this is exactly the ethos of Protocol Labs, right? Of the regenerative finance space, of all the stuff that we're talking about is we're just cut loose, and we're navigating through sensor technology with stuff that knows the technology better than us because it's actually a machine.
Yeah.
And so next to this, I have an image I took from the Foresight Institute, which is connected to Eric Drexler. And I had written about that in one of my last posts, Alison Neumann, who was speaking on emerging tech to Protocol Labs. And it was just a podcast they had with Balaji Srinivasan on the network state, right? So this thing is coming to pass. I think that the book, The End of the Beginning, the Goertzel's book, is maybe 6 or 7 years old, but now it's just coming out into the open, like what's actually happening. And then all of these supposed libertarian, anarchist, fluid social order interactions are actually building the world brain.
Well, even the idea, like they said, voluntary, and everybody, they love voluntary, which I'm this, on the surface, I'm the same way. Like everything should be, voluntary. You shouldn't be, forced to do something you don't want to do. But the idea of voluntarism gets kind of thrown on its head when, you need tokens in order to, you need the tokens to
and you need a wallet. You need a wallet. You are a wallet.
And there's a limit amount of tokens, and the tokens represent a certain set of activity. So what kind of voluntary participation is when there's, when you need it to survive? You're going to need it for food, for transportation, for, or even like socially, like you're going to get ostracized if you don't, so the idea of having some sort of pure voluntary system is not accurate.
Yeah. Okay, so I ended with the Cato Institute, Drew's favorite organization, right? Not. But, here they're talking, it was an article about the privatization revolution reaches the kibbutz. And, they're saying that, well, if they want to have experiments in communal living, more power to them. And if, that original design doesn't work, well, you can make adjustments. And we all benefit by having more patterns and models available to choose from in terms of life. And so I really do feel like that this is at its core. Now, I wouldn't frame it as a kibbutz, because if you do, then it brings the entire baggage of Israel into the equation. And then you can't even have a normal conversation about it. Like, to me, the eusociality ant hive mound is much less polarizing to be able to talk about caste-based divisions of labor in collective organizing, whatever. But the fact that the Cato Institute is sort of uplifting, we should have various experiments in communal living, as long as, you can try them out and adjust them, because that is the complex adaptive system. These module networks, as I anticipate that these flow communities will be, of multifamily housing that is conditional because you don't own it, and is integrated with your workplace and your school place and your health centers, and all linked against your not only your wellness, but the wellness of the environment around your building, and all of it censored and connected, is part of what is trying to create the AGI. And it all happens on Web3. And I'm sure that, Andreessen Horowitz knows exactly what that's all about. I can't imagine anything other than that Flow, that WeWork was a technology company, not a real estate company, and that Flow is a Singularity company, not a real estate company. So that sort of closes out this session.
Masayoshi-san is the founder and CEO of SoftBank, a large holding company based out of Japan. Known as Masa, he is one of the richest people in Japan. In 2017, Masa raised the largest venture capital fund of all time. It's called the Vision Fund.
The size of the Vision Fund was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. It was $100 billion. That essentially equated to several years worth of every US venture capital fund. You put them all together and it's around that size.
So when you told people you were going to raise a $100 billion fund, what was the vision that you actually gave them?
So one vision, which is singularity. Singularity is the concept that in 30 years, computers, artificial intelligence, they will be smarter than us. That's my belief.
The singularity has a lot of implications for how technology will be used by society, and I think it also represents this massive existential threat where someday our creations will outstrip us and not need us, and we will be living lives dictated by machines.
So we are investing $100 billion just on one thing, AI.
All right.
At least my slides.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any other things, I know it's been a little long. Look, but we got through 73 out of 220 slides. So we did a big chunk today.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to do this in several parts, everyone. And so this is just part one. And I'm going to, Alice and I will grab some more clips too, and I'll add them in here. But thank you all for joining us, and catch us again here. Well, probably in the next week, we'll have a new one of these out. Or if you're watching this in the future, it's already there. Search the channel.